Arise, human. Boyd tumbled out of bed and into the feet of a large, angry, white terrier-wolf hybrid. He had been ejected from the bed when Jellybean Jenkins uprooted it from the ground. The area above my tail is itchy. I need you to scratch it. Relieve this itch from my body, and you may be rewarded by your lord. Boyd rubbed the sleep from his eyes. How about a good morning? Or a hello? Or even a tail wag? Goddamn dude, you are the bossiest dog I've ever had. I am neither bossy nor your dog. I am Wolflord of the Seven Plains. Now scratch my tail. Boyd harumphed and then began scratching the tail. Not my actual tail, fool, scratch the area above my tail. Wolflords of the Seven Plains do not like their actual tail touched. Or their paws. Jellybean Jenkins scowled. Don't ever touch my paws. Boyd groaned again and shifted his scratching. Not there, human, slightly to the left. Yes. Yes, this is the spot. Scratch with veracity, and you will incur my gratitude. Jellybean Jenkins began wiggling his butt against Boyd's hand and stepping with his back legs in time to Boyd's scratches. He sighed and groaned. You have removed the offending itch almost effectively as I removed the head of Rocket Simpson when he tried to usurp my authority as pack leader. This is commendable work, human. Boyd kept scratching as Jellybean Jenkins thumped his leg on the ground and wiggled his butt to get the scratching done right. Boyd stopped at one point, but a stern growl got him right back to his job. Jellybean suddenly leapt forward. We are through with this activity. I must return to my foray so that I can descend. Goodbye, human. If I encounter you again, I will take mercy on you. You do remember that you told me you would send me back to Oklahoma, right? You are part of the reason I am in this mess. Whatever happened to that idea? Ah, yes. Our deal. If you are capable, then meet me at the 100th level and I will see if I cannot get you returned. Is this fair to you? 100? Dude, I can't even hardly survive on 10. Jellybean looked at him. Because you have contained the itch above my tail, I will offer my aid. Jellybean held at the sky until it felt it was going to shatter the roof. Boyd subconsciously prepared to manatap his life back, but it didn't actually move. The howl left his ears ringing though. Jellybean raised his nose to the air and sniffed. He slowly began wandering around the room until he spun in a circle and stopped. He then pointed his whole body towards a direction slightly north by northwest and raised his front paw. There is a training center approximately 6.4 miles that way. There is a town called Cave Home. It is occupied by, Jellybean Jenkins sniffed at the air again, it is occupied by Piscus. They have excellent training facilities. You can remove your broken sword soul status there and begin training again. You have made some modest progress, perhaps you can find something that suits you better. In several years, you will have the power to reach level 100 if you can learn to hunt and kill. It seems unlikely, but that is your most effective first step. Consider us even. You owe me no debt for this information. Now I must be off. With that, Jellybean Jenkins leapt out of the third-story window and bounded into the morning light. Within a few seconds, he was out of Boyd's vision. Boyd was transported instantly into a dense and lush jungle environment. They were in a partial clearing, but Xena herself was hunkered down in some sort small tent. She beckoned him inside. Xena wasn't in her standard suit, but instead was dressed in a traditional military camouflage outfit. She had her face painted in green and black. She looked side to side before she talked. I don't have long. We had to do this quietly. We got maybe minutes before they cut us off. Xena moved her head right and left and then pulled Boyd towards her as she whispered. Listen closely, we've passed the point of no return. Things just shifted a ton. You definitely have to get a lot stronger. Jellybean's idea was good, but this time is going to be very different and I cannot help you. You will have many different options this time. Don't pick something idiotic like Sword Soul. A lot of access to advanced classes is limited behind things like achievements, reputation, alignment, and more. Try and consider what will allow you to personally be effective. Try and think about what you actually want this time. Instead of just reacting, think about what you can become. Try and make it happen for real. Things you want are possible now. Don't limit yourself. Any suggestions? Anything you unlock with achievements or some other special entity is almost always better. That's why your old 4A all had super specialized classes. You kind of have to feel this out, but you'll know it when you see it. I have to go. They are closing in. Boyd heard a pop and he was back in the inn. Arriving at the Piscus town was largely uneventful, but it gave him time to think about what Xena had said. Boyd had gotten faster and the inability to feel physical exhaustion meant that he could run as needed. 6.4 miles was only around 28 minutes for him on foot now. He took the main road out of Cave's Wall. It was a risk, but after looking at his map, he didn't think he could safely get there any other way. Many of the alternate routes took him through large encampments of NPCs. Complicating matters, he had mana in his mana array at this point and many groups would be happy to end him according to Salia. Running into a foray was probably suicide, but a small chance of death was better than guaranteed. What he really needed was a way to get around safely so he could gain ranks without having to worry about someone jumping him. He spent the time carefully running from one town to the next, seriously thinking about what would allow him to survive. System, you have arrived at the hub city of Cavehome. Cavehome didn't have guards, and wasn't exactly what he was expecting. All of the buildings were largely glass on the bottom and then stone on top. In the bottom of the buildings, there was what Boyd thought looked most similar to a very large goldfish swimming around and monitoring its wares. The goldfish creatures had tiny manipulators at the edge of their fins that they used for writing and other things. It was like they had multiple fins and dozens of fingers. The fish all wore bulky pairs of goggles over their bug-like eyes. Everything was highly self-contained. There really wasn't much need for guards, as unless you could breathe water you couldn't access the fish themselves, and the bowls looked pretty sturdy. The town was nearly empty, to Boyd's surprise. He had assumed he would have to stalk around and avoid the other forays, but he didn't see many and they didn't seem particularly aggressive. He had a brief and worrisome encounter with a group of demon-like creatures that he thought spotted him, but he ultimately was able to avoid them. Cavehome was small for a hub city, largely on account of the fact that the Piscus buildings were relatively small themselves. Boyd remembered he really only had one other place to compare it to though, so he just decided it was what it was. Boyd struggled to find a way inside the training center, but eventually found a small notch in the wall that allowed him entrance. Unlike most of the buildings, the training center was substantially larger and didn't have the glass bottom. This was almost certainly to account for the large difference in size and breathable habitat of the myriad races that would use the facility. He walked into a large room that looked like a DMV. There were multiple windows around the room and inside each of the windows was a Piscus with what looked like a tablet computer. The building was, not surprisingly, completely empty other than the Piscus. Boyd assumed that few combatants would be interested in training at this low level as most of them were probably already well set up for the maze. He had encountered a similar situation when he multiclassed in Portcullis. Most of the combatants were clearly much higher rank than Boyd and wouldn't need these services. All the same, Boyd entered the building, took a number and then sat down in waiting room. The number was 3, which largely confirmed Boyd's suspicions that this was not a highly trodden area of Zenith. A bubbly voice appeared over the loudspeaker, now serving number 3 at window 2. Boyd double-checked his number and marched over to window number 2. Rockrot hits you for 5 damage. Rockrot cannot be cured without essence of earth. The Piscus in front of him spoke through a loudspeaker. Hello, I can assist you with any additional assignment that is needed. Can you describe the nature of your problem? Excellent. My name is Chiss. I am a registered class technician and can provide you with all the information you might need. I can also provide recommendations, and even give you an effective leveling chart to ensure you achieve your goals. Please place your hand on the sensor. A small plate popped out of the window. Boyd placed his hand on it. The Pictus goldfish began frantically typing into some sort of handheld device. Ah yes, I see. The broken sword soul effect is a substantial debuff. Until you have it removed, you won't be able to accomplish much. What's a debuff? Debuff, it simply means you have something adverse affecting you. You are also suffering from rock rot, although this is a far less severe problem. Also an odd disease for someone of your race to have. Boyd spoke up, it's normal actually, don't worry about it. Anyway, how do I get rid of this broken thing? We can resolve this, but it will be painful and will have a significant cost. This can be resolved here at this training center, fortunately. In order to remove this debuff, it will require us removing the broken portion of your soul. This has permanent effects and will increase the cost of your assignment. Please step into the room at the side. Removing part of my soul? That sounds extreme? Solectomy is a fairly standard procedure, but always comes with a cost. This is a procedure provided by any number of clerics. While Pictus do not believe in the use of clerical magic, we have clerics on staff that can perform this. Please step into the room at the side. The fish motioned him towards a separate area. Boyd walked into a separate room labeled Clerical Services. Inside was an old woman knitting in a chair. She was wearing an all-white dress that made her look like she was either getting married or participating in some sort of weird cult thing. Boyd thought she was human at first, but then noticed she didn't have ears, which meant she was probably something else. She stood up from her chair and began looking him over. Her eyes glazed over white as she poked and prodded him. "Hi," Boyd said enthusiastically. She didn't respond. "Can you help my soul thing?" Again, no response. She took out a pen and paper and scratched a number of figures on it that Boyd discovered he could understand despite having never seen them before. 1 partial solectomy. Fee 4,000 gold. Unfortunately, this one is pretty deep, so you are going to end up with a permanent soul wound. I can cut around in different ways though. Choose which route you want me to take. All of them have downsides, but the upside is you will have complete removal of the debuff. This is the safest way. Your options. Soul wound, sword sensitivity, you take 50% increased damage from attacks with any bladed weapon. Soul wound, scattered soul, you cannot replace life once it is lost. Soul wound, emotional cripple, you lose access to human emotion. Soul wound, deep cut, you are permanently restricted from using any skill provided to sword soul. This includes skills you had not attained. Boyd thought about it for a minute before realizing it was actually a pretty easy choice. 2 of the options were untenable and he finally decided sword sensitivity was too dangerous to deal with. He had already almost died multiple times. He made his selection and wrote it on the piece of paper. The cleric nodded and asked him to lay down on a nearby bench. Boyd walked out of the room feeling sick. He checked his character sheet and it had the debuff marker surrounded in gold. Boyd assumed this meant it was permanent. Soul wound, deep cut, you are permanently restricted from using any skill provided to sword soul. This includes skills you had not attained. Boyd wasn't sure he had made the right choice in hindsight, but he also didn't have much choice. He didn't know how many sword-wielding crazies were out there, but a part of him thought of fleeing. He didn't really want revenge or even to fight Fleein. He would prefer to never see him again at this point. Somehow, he doubted that was possible though. Boyd stumbled back to the initial desk and waved at Chiss. "Hey, I'm back." The Pictus swam around in its chamber before a bubbly voice erupted from the speaker. "Excellent. Just a note before we continue, this is likely to become quite pricey. How will you be paying?" "My fee is 2,000 gold per hour or a flat fee of 5,000 gold. Boyd needed to take his time, so he paid the flat 5,000 gold fee. This was more expensive than calculating class options for multi-classing and took essentially all the gold he had acquired through various measures. Boyd dumped the pile of gold into a small panel that shot out of the bowl that Chiss was floating around in. Chiss let loose a few bubbles and began hammering away at her handheld device. "System, welcome back to assignment." Chiss said, "Wow, This is much better than last time. You now have access to 273 available classes. Would you like to see a complete list? Well, the majority of the classes were fighter-based, so that knocks us down to around 74 classes. Would you like to see all 74? Boyd nodded his head yes, but the list was still longer than he wanted to deal with. He could always go back, but he thought he might take Xena's advice first. Are there classes that are, something I had to unlock or something that I did to make them available? Like something that's more special than the other ones. The fish creature rapidly punched things into its pad and waved its fins back and forth while it waited on the answer. That knocks it down to 4 classes. Should we start with those? Boyd nodded, absolutely. System, available classes, filtered. Option 1, Monk, unassigned, equals Punchdrunk Puncher. Option 2, Wizard equals Alchemist equals Backcountry Chemist. Option 3, Ranger equals Bushwhacker. Option 4, Rogue equals Coward. These are interesting options? I have to admit I am unfamiliar with some of these options. We don't get a lot of humans in Zenith. I'm the first actually. Earth doesn't have magic, so we ain't never been to Zenith. Bubbles appeared from the Pictus mouth. That's not entirely true. Have you considered the fact that Earth might not be the only place humans exist? Boyd looked at the fish creature and shook his head. No, humans are on Earth. And Zamaria. And Polycanus. And actually, let's just leave this alone for now. Wait, what? You're telling me there are other humans out there? The Pictus placed a fin next to the side of its head. Of course, but we should focus on your assignment. Boyd's mind was swimming, no pun intended. Other humans? Other human planets? Did he ever have to go back to Oklahoma? He was losing focus on the task at hand, but realistically he also was just told that humans were not only not alone in the universe, but other humans existed in the universe. He couldn't wrap his head around the thought. Chiss snapped him back to reality. Do you need me to repeat that? What? Boyd asked. I explained the Monk, unassigned, equals Punchdrunk Puncher class to you. Would you like to hear the explanation again? Boyd shook his head and tried to focus. Yes, explain it again. The Punchdrunk Puncher is a tank class that is designed to absorb damage, by absorbing damage. This class receives a large bonus to Constitution and access to the class-specific Ignore Pain skill. Ignore Pain is passively functional and gives you a percentage-based reduction to incoming damage, depending on how much health you have left. It also reduces associated pain with injury. This makes you extremely resistant to multiple blows as long as you don't lose a large chunk of life before this activates. You cannot wear armor other than boots, a belt, and gloves. To qualify for this class, you must be at least rank 10 in Monk and have received more damage than you dealt. Boyd thought about it. That seems good. The Pictus did a little loop in its pseudo-goldfish bowl. This is a relatively common tank class for monks. It has other names for other races and originations, but it's your basic hand-to-hand melee brawler. It doesn't require a deity either. It is strong, particularly against repeated blows. It suffers against large single blows, particularly if they occur early in combat. The real problem is that you receive few offensive benefits and are stuck using your fists still. You will get access to all monk abilities without a deity though, so it would a huge improvement over your current situation. The Constitution bonus can be anything between plus 100 and plus 200 Constitution, which, combined with Ignore Pain, would make you nearly unkillable for at least a dozen or so levels. After that you would struggle without some serious offensive help. Boyd marked this one as a possibility. It definitely had potential benefits. Tell me about the next one. The next class is Wizard equals Alchemist equals Backcountry Chemist. I'll just warn you that you will have to put more or less all of your available points into intelligence to make this happen, and those won't be particularly beneficial to you after that. This class uses a mixture of charisma and wisdom to brew extremely potent potions, but your current intelligence is so low that being able to access the initial wizard class would take some investment. That being said, the backcountry chemist isn't something I am familiar with, as it looks like it's relatively dependent in part on your race and origination. 1 second, the Pictus began frantically scrolling on its personal device. Wow, actually I am pretty impressed. I will give you the long and short on this one. The good news, I actually think this is your strongest overall option. The amount of buffs you could provide to a group would be extremely potent, particularly as many of these aren't commonly available to druids or other classes known to buff their companions. For instance, you'll be able to access Mark V stimulants and Mark V depressants. Many of these are more powerful than any of the standard buffs that most caster classes can provide. Even better, you gain new potions through charisma and wisdom naturally, which means you will have constant updates and won't have to discover recipes. The bad news, it's a pure support class. You won't have many offensive or defensive options realistically. You might even try this route and hope to join some other group. This is a good option. Another negative point here, it looks like you have access to this in part because of your boots. If you took them off, or they were destroyed, you would immediately lose access to most of your class. You would eventually accumulate enough skill to not have to worry about this, but acutely, it could be a problem. Buffs are good then? What's a buff? The opposite of a debuff. Buffs are good. Chiss looked worried at this comment, which made Boyd remember he still really had no clue what was happening. He thought back to Fleon's foray. This would have been nice back then. But he couldn't support no one and nothing. He needed to be functional on his own. The next class is Bushwhacker. It looks like this one is specific to your origination, but it has a lot in common with a fairly common version of Ranger. Your version seems to specialize in front-loaded damage? I can't really define it any better. Either way, the Bushwhacker is an ambusher-type Ranger. You don't get stealth abilities, but you get a lot of bonuses to enemies who don't know you are there or who are caught unaware. The Bushwhacker specializes in a specific kind of trap as well as alchemy and large-bore guns. It looks like the basic goal of the class is ensnare something and then either poison it or blast it before it knows you are there. You also get access to leather-based armors, but you don't get any specializations, so you will be a little squishy even if you get a decent set of equipment. One of the nice things about this class is that you almost meet the necessary requirements for stats already, which is still what is holding you back from a lot of the other classes. If you add a few ranks to Ranger and put the points in agility, then you will be set to go. You can add quite a few more points to this class than some of the other, excluding Punchdrunk Puncher. This one has some downsides too though. Most notably, you are missing any sort of gear to get started. I wouldn't try this until you get some equipment. You will automatically specialize in large-bore guns and can even further specialize into very large-bore guns, so that's your baseline. Find one or the other of those. The class is fairly skill-based versus gear-based, so you can count on steady improvement, even if your gear isn't the best, but you need to have something to start. You don't have anything. Same deal with the leather armor. Overall, this one is a little risky. It has the most offensive power, but it's going to require you to make an effort. Boyd heard a lot he liked in this one. He thought back to Gorpling Camp. He could easily make experience if he could just blast them down one by one. Unless you want to explore other routes, your last option would be Rogue equals Coward. I know the name sounds bad, but you should seriously consider this one given your situation. Coward is a stealth-specialized class with limited offensive or defensive capacities, but a number of ways of solving problems. Coward gets access to most of the best stealthing options, and you can even convert your mana directly into improved invisibility. Believe it or not, some of the deepest runs in history have been made by forays, where everyone selects Coward and just does the best they can. It isn't the most flashy route, but if you just want to escape alive, it might be the safest. You won't get any additional benefits straight away other than the stealth ability, but if you can complete quests and find a way to steal mana nodes, it's incredibly effective. They reviewed a few other options such as a simple ranger class, a few other monk derivatives, and some random fighter archetypes. Ultimately, his broken sword soul debuff really damaged his ability to use the classes effectively. It came down to either backcountry chemist or bushwhacker. If he could find another foray to join, then backcountry chemist was the easy answer. There just wasn't any real guarantee there though. He liked the idea of getting to use guns, but he just didn't have any. Hey, can I ask you other questions? Possibly? I can only answer specific things. Where would I buy guns and stuff I could use? That, I can answer. Anyone can technically answer that. Guards are very helpful in this regard. There is a trade bazaar here in Cave Home, but many of the dwarven towns sell much higher quality equipment for lower prices. Boyd smiled. I know a town with a dwarven mayor near here. They could probably help then. I'd check those merchants first. The trade bazaar would have some extremely strong gear, but they would charge a fortune for it. You pay for convenience. How much are guns and bullets and stuff? Chis the Pictus did a little loop in his fishbowl. Like anything else, it's highly related to how powerful they are. Many guns come with an ever-loading bullets enchant, and at this point in the maze, if you don't have that they aren't worth purchasing. Manual reloading is just too time-consuming, particularly with large and very large bore weapons. You should be thinking 1,000 to 2,000 gold for a couple of decent guns. Armor, probably double that. Trap-making supplies, at least that much, plus whatever else you need. You can avoid the trap-making stuff for now. You won't get that skill for a bit. Boyd inventoried his money. He had some left from his random activities, but this would leave him broke and he wasn't sure he would even be able to afford whatever was available. There was no guarantee that he would even find something in his price range. What's the best way to make money? Questing. Jobs. Kill something with money and take it. Same as anywhere else. What's actually worth money then? I can't figure out how to tell what is good and what's bad. You can get some idea based off scanning the item, but ultimately it takes knowledge of what other forays want. The forays have most of the money. This is probably more than I should be telling you, though. Boyd thought a minute. Can you transfer mana nodes? Can I sell those? Chis let out a few bubbles. It's possible, but why would you do that? Isn't that the reason you are here? The combatants come to claim mana nodes. That's the entire point, right? Yeah, but I ain't here for mana nodes. I just want to get home. Chis said, an interesting proposition. You would have to advertise at the trade bazaar. I have no idea what sort of price you would get. Where is the trade bazaar? Center of town, can't miss it. I'll be back, said Boyd. You have to pay first. Chis said. Boyd and Chis settled up, which left him with even less gold than he thought he had. His current plan was his only chance to fix that he could think of. The trade bazaar was a genuine no-combat area. As soon as he entered, system flashed a message across his vision indicating that all damage was reduced to 0 in this area, and any attempt to harm other combatants would result in an extreme response which he assumed meant death. He had paid 50 gold for a day trading booth. He was standing at a terminal looking at the offers as they streamed past his screen. The offers were pouring in and had been since the first time he advertised. It turns out that the idea of trading mana nodes was a visionary idea that hadn't established any sort of market value, largely because it was basically like trading gold for dirt. His first offer was 10 gold per node, which nearly caused him a heart attack. It shot up almost immediately though, until a bidding war began. Ultimately, the bidding had started to plateau with the most recent bid at 50,000 gold per node. Clearly people had been researching him as many of the offers included very specific additions, some of which were extremely specific and involved rock golems. He wasn't sure how others learned so much about him so quickly, but he had become the equivalent of a 15 minutes of fame type celebrity. The guy dumb enough to sell his mana nodes. The question was how many he was willing to sell. He had 10 mana nodes he could use from his adventures with Merlot's Merryman. He could sell all 10 mana nodes and make a small fortune, but it just meant he would have to gather more later. That seemed much more doable with some new gear and some actual functional abilities though. He had completed the Harpy quest, but it was mostly through a mixture of luck and coincidence in addition to some help from Merlot. That wouldn't last forever. Moreover, he would have to start completing quests while avoiding more serious combat, which wasn't always going to be possible. After a few hours of mulling things over, he had to make a choice or come back the next day and waste another 50 gold. His access terminal in the trade bazaar was extremely simple, with large, brightly lit buttons that indicated each action. He clicked on sales in the terminal interface and then selected the 5 mana nodes he had ultimately decided to put up for sale. The list of offers came in and he went to the bottom of it. His best offer was still 50,000 gold per node, but he didn't trust the foray that was offering it. The accompanying message basically said he could either sell it to them or they would find him and kill him the moment he stepped out of the bazaar. While that was certainly possible, he didn't really respond well to threats, especially ones that he couldn't see. Ultimately, he accepted a separate offer. System, trade offer as follows. 5 mana nodes. Jor's Gallant Giants, Jor, 200,000 gold. Basic Alchemy Supply Kit. Advanced Alchemy Supply Kit. 100 jet crystals, unpurified. The terminal did an approximation of the math for him. This offer was worse than the 250,000 gold the other foray was offering, but the accompanying note assured him that it would be done without any need for face-to-face transfer. While he would be safe within the trade bazaar, it felt a lot safer to simply have it done. He was concerned people might follow him as it was now fairly widely known he was a single combatant with at least 10 mana nodes, assuming he hadn't traded them. He clicked accept and felt a suction in his gut. System, you have lost 5 mana nodes. Bazaar message, you have a package waiting in locker ZZ546. Boyd walked around the facility for a bit before he found a sign pointing him towards the locker area. It was an immense hallway that started at A1. He walked what felt like half a mile across lockers of drastically varying sizes before he finally found the right locker. It was fairly small, commensurate with the size of the relatively small items he had acquired. He couldn't figure out how it would open, but as he moved his hand towards it, it popped open immediately. Happy that he had made a fair deal, or at the very least, had made a deal that was fair for him, he left the trade bazaar and headed back to the training center. He was extremely careful to the point of paranoia while walking around town. Whereas once he felt like no one noticed him, he suddenly felt like a marked man. At the same time, he was also aware that the streets were far from bustling, and thus it was mostly just paranoia at this point. He specifically asked for Chiss at the training center and after a few minutes was back in front of the Pictus. Made a decision? Yeah, I think I got it figured out. Bushwhacker. Excellent. Chiss said. As a part of her fee, they had mapped out a strategy to get him the necessary stats. He had to take 2 additional points in Monk, unassigned, which got him next to nothing other than the requisite agility to multiclass. This was beneficial as he ended up with a substantial number of ranks in Bushwhacker. System, you have gained 11 ranks in Bushwhacker. A massive scroll of text went by him. Based on advice from Chiss, he spent his points on a mixture of agility and constitution, which would help him with multiple aspects of the build. Large and very large bore guns both had higher strength requirements than traditional guns, but he was well on his way there from having spent many of his early points on strength. Chiss said he'd know when to start bumping that one when he could no longer lift a gun easily. Unlike previous efforts, he went through his skills more closely. He hadn't gotten access to trap making yet, but he would in a few more ranks. He had access to both large bore guns and some options to specialize in his gun preference already. Gun specialization, Mark I. Weapon handling, guns. Your accuracy and reload speed are improved with all guns. Akimbo, you can wield a one-handed gun in each hand with no penalty to accuracy or fire rate. Cannot be used with very large bore weapons. Very large bore proficiency, you gain proficiency with very large bore weapons. While you will still take some damage upon firing very large bore weapons, you do not suffer from flinch. You also have increased accuracy and reload speed when using a very large bore weapon. Targeted ambush Mark II. Xenophobia. Targeted ambush attacks on races other than your own deal substantially more damage. One shot, one kill. After initiating a targeted ambush, your next attack does double damage if it hits a marked target. Gash bait. Traps set prior to initiating a targeted ambush will serve as an attractant to your targets, making them more likely to hit your traps. Boyd read over the options carefully multiple times. He had never used the targeted ambush ability, so he was tempted to save this choice for later. Ultimately though, he decided he couldn't really go wrong with xenophobia from the description. He reluctantly chose it. There just weren't many humans around, so it would always be effective. His number one concern was that he had no idea what the word meant, as he had never seen it before. He grudgingly accepted it, but was still opposed to the fact it looked different than what he used to seeing, and thus he immediately didn't care for it. They all called him Gmul, which was annoying. It was the very idea that Gmul was his name that was so frustrating. It was a manifestation of God. It didn't need a name, it didn't have a name. Lam was God. It was simply the other half of the life cycle. It was Gmul. Eventually, after enough mitoses, it would again be Lam. It was a cycle. There was Lam. There was Gmul. It took many Gmuls to make Lam. It didn't matter how long it took. It didn't matter how many cycles it took. There would always be Gmul. There would always be Lam. It did prefer being Lam though, if it could be honest with itself. Having the true power of a god was just preferable to having part of the powers of a god. The only way to attain godhood again was encourage the cycle. To encourage rebirth. Something inside the maze was preventing rebirth. It was preserving things in some sort of stasis that prevented the cycle. It kept Gmul from sustaining the cycle. It was slowing his ascension. Gmul could tolerate a lot. Lam could tolerate a lot. Their lifespan was infinite. It gave them perspective. It was okay if things took time, but it wasn't okay if they stopped. Slow was okay. It wasn't great. Stopping was intolerable. So it decided to enter the maze and solve the problem himself. It had already made a great deal of progress. It killed, and it planted. Rebirth would occur. The cycle would continue. Ultimately, Gmul would find the source of the problem and eliminate it, whatever it took. Whatever it took. The weaponmaker's shop sat at the top of a hill. His forge overlooked a ravine that was deep and dark. The light from the forge shone in the distance. Boyd smiled. It reminded him of his uncle's old shop. A tiny little building at the edge of the property. Sometimes he was making his own bullets, sometimes he was smoking meat, sometimes he was just out drinking beer away from the world. Boyd loved that little building though. Whatever was going on, it was fun. He knocked on the door of the shop and then ducked under the small archway. "Hey there dude, the mayor told me you sell guns and shit." A small squat man glared up from the counter and then went back to reading his magazine. Boyd guessed he was a dwarf. He filled most of the few qualities that Boyd knew about dwarves. He was short and stocky, he had a very thick beard, and he seemed to like smithing. "Hey man, you speak English, or whatever it is I am speaking or something?" The man didn't glare up this time, but said in a flat gruff voice, "I sell guns, but I don't sell to riffraff. Get out." The man looked up at the gold coin. "Why didn't you say so? I have all sorts of wares to sell a fine individual like you. What are we in the market for?" The man jumped off his stool and began meandering over to the cases of weapon and armor. Boyd was a little perturbed with the rapid change in demeanor, but he needed the equipment. "Yeah, I guess I need like guns and armor and shit. Here's the long and short of it, I just did a switch to bushwhacker cause I used to be a monk then a sword soul and then I couldn't do that anymore. So then this asshole I know named Flea." Boyd continued on for a few minutes rambling about this and that until the dwarf raised his voice to interrupt. "Got in over your head, huh? Well, let's see if we can dig you out. Let me show you something appropriate." Most of the items Boyd was shown cost in excess of 100,000 gold, and that was more than he wanted to pay for a single item. None of them were in very large bore either, which made less sense for him to purchase. Eventually, he settled on the minimum that he had been advised to purchase. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for now. Everloading 99 calories, lever action rifle, enchanted, a standard lever action rifle. Magazine size, 1. Very large bore. Unlimited reload speed, but requires lever action. Causes flinch. Deals 1 damage to you whenever you fire this item. Highly effective against soft tissue. Minimal armor penetration. Flinch reduces accuracy by 50% on all shots. You are immune to flinch due to very large bore weapons specialization. The man said, keep in mind, very large bore weapons fire relatively slower bullets. You are more likely to knock an armored target on its ass than put the bullet inside it. Those 99 calories rounds hurt like heck fire too. You should practice with the lever and figure out how to quickly aim and reload. Boyd stared down the sights. This thing have a scope or anything? What's a scope? You know, like a thing you mount on top to see further away. A scrying lens? I don't understand, why would you need a scrying lens with that implant you got? Look Svenian. How am I going to attach a scope that can beat that? The man started muttering in a language that wasn't translated for Boyd as he shook his head. Boyd was used to shooting through his other eye, but he quickly realized upon switching shoulders that he'd never need a scope again. The Venian implant was a far better scoping system than anything he'd ever seen before. It had targeting systems in place already. It made the most advanced scope on Earth look like iron sights. He realized he'd be able to make shots he'd never been able to make in the past. Sweet, how much? 13,000 gold. That ever-loading enchant ain't cheap. I was told it should be around 1,000 gold. You were told wrong, you want it or not? The man raised his eye at Boyd with a smile on his face. Still having no idea if that was a fair price, Boyd came to the conclusion he had little choice. Deal. I need something for close-up too. You got anything like a 1911? I have no idea what that is. Are you sure you know anything about this stuff? I need like a small gun that I can shoot things up close with. Handgun. Boyd made a pew-pew noise and turned his fingers into a gun. Handgun. Why didn't you say so? The man thought for a minute, walked to a separate container and produced what Boyd identified as a Civil War-style revolver. The barrel was probably 8 inches long, with a massive hammer on the top. The only difference between what he was using to seeing and this weapon was that it was all metal, and had a shine to it that was almost green. Ever-loading handwister of static poison, extraordinary, this 85 calories revolver fires static poison bullets. Similar to other expanding rounds, bullets fired from this gun expand upon hitting soft substances. Static poison rounds take this a step further by poisoning the target persistently until they are removed. Highly effective against soft tissue. Minimal armor penetration. This weapon causes flinch. Flinch reduces accuracy by 50% on all shots. You are immune to flinch due to very large bore weapons specialization. How's this work? Boyd asked. He fiddled with the pistol, practicing aiming with it. It was extremely heavy, almost cumbersome to hold. He spun the chamber to open it and found it was filled with 5 extremely large bullets that looked like they were primed with a small mountain of gunpowder. The merchant looked at him quizzically and sputtered, "You point it and shoot. Are you dense or what?" Boyd scowled, "Nah, the poison thing. Point it and shoot, if you hit something it will poison them. The more poison you pump in, the more damage it does. It's damn near impossible to get rid of static poison without a cleric. So if something is close to dying and you got a bunch of poison in it, you can just run away and wait it out." Boyd thought about it and realized that had some good potential. He'd gone deer hunting with Walker a number of times. Walker had these arrow tips that caused a ton of bleeding in the deer. If you couldn't kill it with a single arrow, it would usually bleed out. Then you just had to track it down. I'll take it. How much? 30,000. Boyd whistled. God damn, that seems like a lot. It's extraordinary quality weapon, and you are down here fighting for your life as a gunslinger with no guns. Sounds cheap to me. Boyd was sure he was getting screwed on the deal, but he chalked over the 30K he owed from the change from the last purchase. In addition to the weapons, Boyd bought some plain leather armor that he strapped on over his jeans and Def Leppard t-shirt. It fit nicely over his current attire, but left him feeling like a mixture of Davy Crockett and Crocodile Dundee. It wasn't enchanted, as it turned out enchanted leather armor was far more expensive than the equivalent weapons. He kept his harpyskin rawhide boots on, as they were immensely better than anything else he could purchase. The merchant charged him almost 5,000 gold for the whole set, which he didn't mind until he later noticed the exact same thing in the store for about half of that price. He was feeling more and more like he probably was getting robbed, but he had the money, and he had the need. Boyd turned to leave. He'd spent about as much as he felt safe spending, hoping to keep the rest for other purposes. He checked the weapon one last time, and even test-fired each one with the dwarf's permission. Sure enough, each fired and automatically reloaded. The rifle kicked like nothing he had ever felt, and the revolver damn near took his good eye out when it jumped in his hand, but he got control of both of them fairly quickly after knowing what to expect. He got a pistol belt for his pistol and a sling to keep his rifle on his back. It made carrying them both fairly simple, but he was feeling more and more like he was starring in a Clint Eastwood movie. The merchant charged him again, although not exorbitantly. As he was leaving, the man yelled at him, "Hey, I got one other thing you might like if you have the money. A good pistol is hard to beat, but if it falls out of your hand, you're gonna have a hard time doing much of anything. I got a good weapon for you. Sometime rare and strong. It ain't cheap though. Want to see?" Boyd shrugged. Why not, can't hurt to look. The merchant scampered to the back and came out with a leather scabbard with a long curved knife in it. One of my favorite treasures. A truly unique item. No one even knows I have this. It's my prized possession. Usually it wouldn't even be for sale. He pulled the knife from its leather scabbard and presented it to Boyd. System, souvenir billhook from Party Marty Ginnerdy's Jungle Cruise Adventure, Magic Mushrooms and Full Swap Orgy Edition, replica unique. Martine Ginnerdy was considered one of the greatest blacksmiths in all of Astrianim. In fact, Marty's works routinely sold for small fortunes throughout the universe based not only on their amazingly artistic appeal, but based on the fact they were typically amongst the sharpest, strongest, and most durable weapons in the known universe. It didn't matter what Marty tried his hand at, he could craft almost any battlefield implement to perfection, often innovating generational advances in metallurgy, smithing, and more. So, it was a little bit of a surprise when Marty gave it all up to start a fishing boat tour company. While he originally just did fishing tours across Astrianim, this quickly became fishing, and drugs, tours based on both Marty's preference and the clientele he attracted. It wasn't a huge leap from there until it became themed parties on Marty's boat that had less and less to do with fishing and more to do with partying. The end result was Party Marty Ginnerdy's Jungle Cruise Adventure. Eventually, he sold out his shares and corporate interests took over until it became a shell of its former self. What was once a way for an old blacksmith to live out his retirement years doing what he loved, drugs, sex, fishing, sleeping, eventually became a joke. It was now a brand. Party Marty Ginnerdy's Jungle Cruise Adventure, Ganja and Greenery. Party Marty Ginnerdy's Jungle Cruise Adventure, Snort It or Shoot It. It even had version for the kids, Party Marty Ginnerdy's Jungle Cruise Adventure, Dinosaur Fun Ride. One of the major perks of going on a Party Marty cruise was the souvenir billhook. Marty realized pretty early on that citizens didn't like drudging through the thick jungle of Astrianim. He began giving all his clients a large hooked knife used for cutting through jungle brush that was commonly used by the locals of Astrianim, and thus was born the Party Marty billhook, aka a Party Marty. While several thousand exist, the early souvenir billhooks were handcrafted by Marty himself, and commonly sell for a small fortune. Not only are they extremely sharp and weighted to lop damn near anything in two, but the early ones were Marty Ginnerty originals that were handcrafted to perfection. That fell off over time as the popularity of his program eventually led to a reduction in quality. This one was made in the later years when he had stopped putting in the same amount of effort. While it's not his best work, it is a real party Marty and a hell of a lot better than most anything else you'll find. Billhooks aren't actually made for combat. They are made for chopping the heavy plants of astraeoneme into multiple pieces so you can walk past them. As such, billhooks are classified as both tools and knives, similar to a machete. What they lack in any sort of defensive capacity, they make up for in the ability to lop things in two. Souvenir billhooks from Party Marty Ginnerty's Jungle Cruise adventure have the same capacity to remove limbs and heads as they do branches of large plants. Attributes: extremely durable, extremely sharp, heavy, strength required, 20. Unique: attacks made with this weapon have a very high chance to dismember. Unique: deals massive additional physical damage when swung downwards. How much? 250,000. Boyd grabbed it and swung it around. Lifting it up was hard, but whenever he swung it down, it felt like it would cut through solid steel. He was worried he wouldn't be able to use it due to the broken sword soul debuff, but quickly realized that because it was classified as a tool and a knife and not a sword. The more he swung it, the more he fell in love with it. He could afford the 250,000, but it would leave him with basically nothing left. What about 150,000? Boyd asked. I can do 225, but that's it, the man said. The merchant was eyeing him aggressively. He looked around the store. Almost everything in the store was priced at values half or less of what he had paid. Sometimes less. He was starting to feel like he might be getting ripped off. What's it really worth? Boyd asked. It's worth what I say it is, so if you can't pay that much, then don't tell me you have money. The merchant ripped the item out of his hands. If you aren't going to buy it, there is a handling fee though. It's 100 gold. I have to wash the item after you touch it. It lowers the value. Takes time to clean it too. That'll be 100 gold. Man, I ain't paying you 100 gold to touch it. Maybe if you'd said first, but I ain't doing it now. That's ridiculous. If you want, I can call the guards and we can discuss it with them. They'll pull your guts out and then I keep all your gold. It's fine by me. The merchant's face was quite grim and Boyd decided it was past time to leave. He reluctantly pulled out 100 gold and handed it him. He walked out of the store, highly frustrated with being extorted. Boyd was in a store down the street, but he kept thinking about the billhook. He had the 225,000 gold left over, but it would leave him with almost nothing. He definitely needed some sort of knife though, the merchant was right about that. Boyd had gone to multiple other stores, but he hadn't found anything he wanted. Most of the available items were fairly simple versions of a plain dagger or looked more like a chef's knife. None of them had the weight or feel of the billhook. He was currently handling a simple magical dagger that he found to be the next best thing. It was much smaller, but he felt like he could at least use it. Best I can do is 500 gold on that one. Really? That's pretty cheap. Boyd tossed 500 gold on the counter. The new merchant looked at him oddly. You think that's cheap? Seriously? I would have settled for 200. Yeah, I paid like 13,000 for this thing. Boyd motioned towards his rifle. Boyd's jaw dropped. Seriously? The dwarf laughed. Yes, absolutely. Did you buy that revolver from him too? Yeah, I paid 30,000 gold? Are you serious? If you had asked, I could have got you the same thing for probably 6 to 8, maybe 11 at worst. Goddamn, are you serious? I'll just go get my money back from this sell guy and go through you then. Boyd started to head out the door. I'll be back. You aren't gonna get anything back. Take this as a lesson, either learn to haggle or learn to shop. The fossils out there are a dime a dozen. This place ain't for the weak of heart or the weak of mind. Take the loss and learn your lesson. Now you want the knife or not? Boyd had started walking out without his intended purchase. The merchant tossed it to him. Boyd flipped it around his hands a couple times. He liked it. He didn't love it. He wanted the billhook. He didn't know what to do. It was just another moment of indecision. He was lost at sea in a place with no directions, and it was making him angrier and angrier. He hadn't asked for this, and he'd been lied to at almost every turn. What if I go tell the guards? Boyd asked. If I had to guess, they ignore you. I'd say ignoring you would be your best result. Ignoring you is if it goes well. If it goes badly, Docell tells them you stole it and they kill you on the spot. The guards aren't here for you all. They are here for us. Dwaves. I wouldn't risk it. Take the loss. They don't really care. You are best off just not bothering them. And if you need anything else, I recommend coming back here. Boyd stared hard at the dwarf. He thought back to what Salia had said. Hey, I changed my mind on that billhook. Can you bring it out? 200 gold to look. Docell was starting at some sort of trade magazine written in a language that didn't translate for Boyd. He didn't bother looking up. You said 100 gold last time. This time it's 200. You didn't buy last time. You are just wasting my time. I want my recompense. Boyd groaned. Fine, just go get it. Docell looked up from his magazine and grumpily wandered into the back of the store while Boyd vaulted over the counter. There was a small commotion in the back before Docell came charging out of the door to the back of his shop holding the leather scabbard. I had some troubles locating it, so I decided it is 250 to look this. Boyd jammed the knife in Docell's neck as hard as he could and then jerked it out. The blood sprayed across the shop. It wasn't going to be possible to clean this up, he just had to make sure no one knew it was him. He covered Docell's mouth with his hands to shut him up as the dwarf let out a small gurgle before slumping over dead. Boyd didn't get any experience. He assumed merchants must not be worth any. They'd all be dead otherwise. It was his first time using targeted ambush, but it was entirely intuitive. As soon as he activated it, an outline of the dwarf appeared in his vision. He could trace his movements as needed, even through walls. Even better, it offered weak points on the dwarf's body. A glowing red spot appeared on both sides of the dwarf's neck, indicating that he had a strong chance of a fatality if he could stick him in the right spot. When he had pulled the buried knife out of Docell's neck, he saw his life bar plummet entirely and instantly. The outline went away. He hadn't experienced it before, but a little timer appeared in his vision indicating targeted ambush couldn't be used for another 5 minutes. That wasn't anticipated, but it meant that he would have to use it more for taking out a single target rather than a group of targets. He grabbed his new weapon off the front desk. He left the money and everything else. He put the party Marty in a leather sling that fit quite nicely and strapped it across his back opposite his rifle and walked out the door. He was ready. Boyd was exhausted, but only mentally. He couldn't be exhausted physically anymore, but he'd never had a day like that in his life. It was exhilarating, but also left him dripping with a mixture of fear, anxiety, and defeat. Party Marty was caked in blood. It had dried solid from the edge of the blade all the way down to the handle. Boyd had decided he had no intent on trying to get the blood out of his leathers. It was caked in already. It would eventually dry and fall apart in the dust and winds and battles and everything else. He just stripped them off and threw them on the ground. He finally trashed his Def Leppard t-shirt. He'd recently bought new socks, or the Zenith equivalent, at the trade bazaar, and those were still usable. The jeans were mostly trashed, but he thought he would try them on one more time. Boyd fell into bed at Glip Glop's Hip Hop House, Flip Flop House. He should have cleaned himself or his equipment, he knew, but he didn't have the energy. His life was still reasonably high after killing a substantial number of critters, but his mana was largely depleted. Every time he had an even nominal amount, he mana tapped it as fast as possible to try and fix whatever had happened to his ankle when he jumped off the ledge earlier in the day. He had been low on life and was being chased by some sort of four-legged hybrid of mammals he didn't really understand. He couldn't hit it because it was too fast, so instead he ran and then baited it to follow him over a ledge. The creature paused and then jumped over the ledge. It was enough time for the system to consider the creature unaware of him, a lesson he took to heart. The hybrid mammal landed right next to him, but he was on his feet and he already had Party Marty lifted in the air. His targeted ambush had just come off cooldown, so he'd activated it just as the creature hit the apex of its jump. It landed with a thud and Party Marty landed on its neck half a second later. He cleaved deep into the creature's neck and shoulder and was rewarded with an endless fountain of blood and stink and shit. He smelled so bad that the new innkeeper had made him stand outside while they renegotiated his room. He'd paid more than double the going rate, but he needed it and he had the money. He'd get clean tomorrow. Tonight he needed to rest. Xena's voice echoed through his brain, "Wake up. Wake up. Emergency. Seriously, you gotta wake up now. Get your shit and get ready to go. Doesn't matter what it looks like. This is already in motion. I used our little connection to start this. You are going to loop cast the spell, so don't fight it, okay? This took a lot of effort on my end." Boyd could hear the voice in his head, but he was out of it. "You gotta go with it, okay? Don't fight it. Just make sure you have all your stuff. The spell will be instant the second it works. I'll tell you more in a bit. I don't know for sure what's going to happen, but I think that we are getting ready to get a lot closer to a few big events that could change the shape of things to come. You gotta let this happen or we don't have a chance. Say you understand. Say you understand so I know I can go through on my end." Boyd had no clue what the voice in his head was talking about. Get up and grab your shit. If you start casting without it, just ignore it and grab everything you can. It'll take you at least a few tries to luck out on the cast. Please say you understand. Boyd, who had minimally woken up, rolled out of bed and began grabbing his things and stuffing them into his pack. Instead, he started saying something he didn't understand. He waved his hands to invoke some sort of incantation he had never heard of and knew nothing about. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. Boyd was continually saying words, but still didn't understand at all. It was happening over and over again, almost instantly, and he couldn't figure out why he wouldn't quit when he didn't want to do it to begin with. He kept failing and failing. He tried to regain control, to use his mouth for something else, but he couldn't. He was mentally and physically exhausted and this wasn't helping. He wanted sleep, not whatever this was. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. He shook the sleep from his body. He tried to focus his efforts. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. He had no idea what was going on and he'd never heard of this spell. He'd certainly never learned how to cast it. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. He desperately started packing up his things. Whatever was happening, he'd want his equipment. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. Every time he moved a bit too much, it happened again. Spell failure came with an internal zap of sorts. It didn't affect his life, but it made him a bit nauseated. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. He wobbled over to the bathroom and began puking in what passed for a sink. It made it harder to talk for sure. I need you somewhere else. This will get you there. Don't worry about it. Just let it happen. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. He threw everything he could into his pack and tried to remain still. He tried to concentrate as hard as he could on letting the words fall out of his mouth. He was getting sicker and sicker. He tripped over a chair while walking around the room and barfed on the floor. You have mana poisoning from spell failures. Casting spells has a chance to damage you. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. Life 133/154. He couldn't cast it. He knew that. You begin casting interconnectedness. Your spell fails. Life 116/154. You can't cast it. Ever. You need to embrace your own abilities. He thought back to what Fleon had said and realized what Xena meant. It was the wrong approach. He needed to make it harder. He started doing jumping jacks. He started attempting a cartwheel. He stood on one foot. He tried to recite the alphabet at the same time. Somewhere around the 14th, puke-spewing cartwheel everything changed. You begin casting interconnectedness. Uncultured swine activated. System, you have joined Fleon's Find Foray for the Filari. System, Fleon's Find Foray for the Filari is the first to reach the 20th floor. System, your foray is currently in stasis. System, you have been placed in stasis until a suitable opposition can be found. System, opposition has arrived. Stasis removed. Stasis duration approximately 22 hours and 15 minutes. System, welcome to level 20. Currently, 84/100 forays remain. 19 additional independent combatants remain. Boyd looked around with no idea what was happening. All 4 members of his previous foray were standing around him. They all looked mostly the same, except Gmul, who had grown slightly larger and slimier. He was shedding bits of ooze everywhere he moved, which was gross, but also somehow endearing. Jellybean Jenkins still hadn't acknowledged him, but Fleon was staring at him dead on. He had his helmet on so Boyd couldn't see his eyes, but he was sure they were blazing. He spun in a circle to figure out where he was. Waves of nausea hit him and he fell back down to the ground, so try and gain his bearings. He felt dehydrated and depleted, like he had a stomach virus or something. He shook away the feelings and stood back up to look around. His best guess is that they landed in some sort of giant, natural valley. Underneath his feet was lush, green grass, still moist with dew. He could hear a river somewhere in the distance, the water rushing down some sort of waterfall. He inhaled deeply and was greeted with crisp air, the kind you breathed in first thing on a cold mountain morning. He briefly closed his eyes and enjoyed the feeling of being out of a cave and back in nature, soaking it all in. Caves definitely weren't for him. He opened his eyes and further examined his surroundings. The walls of the valley were mountainous cliffs that went almost straight up. The cliff walls were pockmarked with metal doors that featured unsettling scenes of war on their face. He sighed. This place always sucks eventually. Realizing there was an open question in the air, Boyd said, I have no idea. Honestly, I'd much rather be where I was, but something weird just happened and now I'm here. So let's get this shit show going again. What's the deal with the hills people? Which direction? North. They aren't moving, Salia said. Boyd focused his Venian eye in the distance to the north. He wasn't sure what a hill person was, but it appeared like they were poorly kempt ape-like creatures who had a random number of legs and arms that they used interchangeably. All of them were armed with an array of maces, swords, and axes that glowed an array of colors. Boyd assumed all of them were enchanted. He also realized quickly that he had no idea how to fight one, and if they started this way, he was firing after they took their first step. Their caster had summoned some sort of giant eye they were all looking through. He tried to scan it but suddenly felt a shove and fell to the ground. Fleon looked down from above him, sword drawn. I don't know how you did this. I don't care. It won't stand. As soon as this combat is over, I will remove you the same as last time. Don't get comfortable. Fleon raised a hand but Boyd tinked his revolver against Fleon's armor. The barrel of his revolver was buried in a crook in Fleon's plate, near his crotch. Fleon lowered his hand. Fine. When this is over you will be removed, forcibly if necessary. What are the hill people doing now? Jellybean Jenkins walked over and pulled Boyd up to his feet with a massive white paw. I agreed to give you mercy the next time I saw you. You may now consider that debt paid. Good to see you too, buddy, Boyd said. He clapped Jellybean Jenkins on the back. Jellybean Jenkins spun and growled, "Do not make assumptions about me. I did not say it was good to see you. I don't understand your aphorism, and if you strike me again, I will initiate combat with you. This combat will be to the death?" "Yeah, I figured as much. You're about the same." Boyd sighed and laughed at the dog. "Which lever does which?" Flean asked. Gmol projected a big waving hand and then an arrow towards a small placard in front of him. It explained all the things Salia had just said along with a little pictogram. Across the way, the Hills people were crowded in front of something similar on their side. There was clearly symmetry in the trap. Boyd and Salia went over to little placard and started examining the diagram. Flean walked over to the lever on the right and reached towards it. "Just let me know when it's our turn to action the lever. You don't tell me what I can or cannot do. The choice is mine." Flean stood up and put his hand on the lever to try and pull it. "Or simply kill them and take theirs once the nodes are distributed?" Flean asked. "Actually no, it looks like if everyone plays this straight then the barriers stay up and we go right, they go left and that's the end of it. Gmol, see if you can project something high enough for them to see that if we all just pull the left lever then it's best for all." "I did not make this decision yet." "Gmol, do no such thing." Gmol's rune was already glowing brightly and was depicting a series of images high in the air. It was flashing set of images indicating the other group should pull the left lever over and over again. It also had a little flashing set of images showing the right lever equals zombie and then some sort of apocalypse beast that ate both of the groups. It was whimsical, but effective. The Hills people seemed to be locked in a somewhat similar struggle as none of them were looking at Gmol's message. Instead, there was a dust-up of arms and hands and legs and feet between four of the members. After a few minutes, one of them emerged superior and the rest of them began forming some sort of weird mutant totem pole. The winner of the melee dashed up his friends to the top and started repeatedly lifting his left hand. Gmol shot up an image of his left hand in response. "Gmol, no decision has been made. I remain leader of this foray." Gmol sludged over to the lever and shot out some sort of slimy appendage-like extension and jerked on the left lever. The front of the Hills people bubble collapsed in the distance, and the front of their own bubble collapsed a few seconds later. "I command you to cease this action, Gmol. I will decide our course." Flean began striding towards Gmol, but stopped when Gmol lit up brightly with rainbow iridescence. Boyd had no idea what this meant, but he assumed it was probably a very thinly veiled threat if it was veiled at all. "Do not threaten me, slime. You have no right to make these decisions." Gmol slimed his way through the front of the now open bubble and onto the next room where he promptly threw open the left lever immediately and began sliming forward. "Halt, slime. I have not agreed on this." Flean began jogging towards Gmol, who was already well on his way to the next room. The others followed suit and began following Flean, who continued to berate Gmol, to no effect. The fourth room was the last of the bunch. On the other side of the valley, the Hills people were bounding about, seemingly thrilled with the outcome. Alternatively, they might have been preparing for war. It was hard to tell which was which as the situation was highly kinetic. Flean raced ahead and stood in front of the levers. "No one touches anything until we agree. This is my order. I believe we should pull the right lever. This will give us an advantage in combat. We can take the remaining mana nodes. I put this to a vote." "What did you say, human?" Flean asked. "They pulled the right lever. See, our enemy is out to kill us." Flean reached for the right lever, but Boyd bolted in front of him. Gmol's rune gave a thumbs up to Boyd's comments via projection. Flean ignored Jellybean. "You do not get a choice, human. I do not care if you think are a part of this or not, you get no say." Jellybean Jenkins spoke again. "He's right. Pull the right one. We have better things to be doing than this. They made their choice, we kill whatever comes out of that crypt and take the nodes." This is only level 20, we won't have any trouble and we should get another note out of it. He then began drooling and then proceeded into the standard I crave slaughter and I long for the cold grip of death's touch and the blood of our enemies will soak this and that type thing that he always said. You know my stance, Fleein said as he put his hand on the lever on the right. Jellybean Jenkins glared across the gap at the Hills people. Pull the right lever. Let us feast on their ignorant flesh. Fleein again began to pull the lever. Salia shouted, stop. It isn't even 2 to 2. It's 2 and 2. Boyd still gets a vote. He's a part of the foray again. He already said left lever. Pull the left. It's final. They looked around at each other. Fleein spoke first. I am the leader. He thrust a finger at Boyd, you do not vote. I serve as tiebreaker. We pull the right lever. Fleein marched back over to the lever and put his hand on the right one. He is no member of this foray. I don't know how he pulled this trickery off, but he will receive no vote. I will disband this entire foray and replace the lot of you before I let that one make decisions on my behalf. Salia had already flown to the left lever and was ready to pull it. Fine, you say it should be your decision, I say it should be Boyd's as a part of the foray. Why don't we just go by the traditional method and let the highest rank member decide? That's Gmol, so we pull the left lever. Do it, Gmol. Gmol began sludging its way over to the levers. Boyd interrupted, Gmol isn't the highest ranking person or thing or whatever anymore though. I mean, well, yeah, he was, but Jellybean Jenkins has gained like 2,000 ranks since we've been here. I scanned him the other day with this neat-ass gizmo that Salia stuck in my eye. He's almost rank 3,000 now. Congrats, puppers. The other party members turned towards Jellybean Jenkins. Foolish human, you have mishandled the miniature bird's technology. You should never have received such a thing in the first place. You have no capacity to use such an advanced item. Certainly you do not think that someone could gain that many ranks with the pittance of kills we have accumulated? Fleein casually agreed, indeed, it would be impossible. Your equipment has malfunctioned. It matters not. I am leader of the Filari and leader of this foray. If you wish to leave, you may do so, Salia. Salia's VMR faded into stealth, no. Something's off. Denian technology doesn't malfunction. Not even for hapless twats like this guy. Plus he's too stupid to lie effectively. I want to see if he's right. Double J, reopen your stat sheet to us. I will not. This is absurd. Fleein, pull the lever. Open it, Salia said. If you have nothing to hide, then open it. Boyd heard the VMR power on and fly into the air, but he couldn't see anything but a shimmer through the stealth tech. At the same time, Gmol began sliding backwards away from the group. Fleein looked concerned. He scooted away from the levers and backed up against the barrier of the bubble. This is a simple request, Wolf Lord. Open it now. If the Venian and the human are lying, it will be simple to prove and we can simply remove them from the foray and continue as two until we can replace them. Open your sheet. Jellybean Jenkins walked towards the middle of the room before sharply turning towards the levers, springing towards them in a flash. Fine. Let me show you. Jellybean Jenkins jerked the lever on the right. Exactly how powerful I am. Jellybean Jenkins has left Fleein's fine foray for the Filari. Boyd had seen all sorts of absolutely mind-bogglingly crazy shit happen to Jellybean Jenkins. He grew and lost chunks of fur and tissue. He morphed between being a wolf, an oversized West Highland Terrier and a part biped Were Terrier thing on regular occasions. He summoned blood from the sky. Boyd once saw him take a shit and then kick it backwards behind him like a dog spreading its scent, and then immediately follow this with pulling a whetstone out and sharpening his axes. He frequently urinated on the outside of buildings they were sleeping in. He would commonly rip smaller creatures to pieces and eat the big half as a dog and then smaller half as a bipedal hybrid. Boyd was never truly surprised by Jellybean Jenkins at this point. He also knew more about Jelly Bean than the other members though. Boyd was, in fact, the only person at this point who had a critical piece of information, he just didn't know that he had it. If everyone on the battlefield knew what Boyd knew, the rest of them would have approached the situation differently. In fact, most of them would have tried to kill Jellybean Jenkins a long time ago. He had accrued an absolutely dangerous level of power. That wasn't even the major problem though. Boyd knew the base class of a Wolf Lord of the Seven Plains is not a fighter. Jellybean Jenkins is a necromancer. Boyd didn't understand it at the time, but when he deep scanned Jellybean Jenkins, he learned his class progression was as follows: Necromancer equals Death Knight equals Death Lord equals Wolf Lord of the Seven Plains. While he had learned his fighting skills as both a Death Knight and a Death Lord, his true talent lay in necromancy. If Boyd had explained this to anyone else, anyone with a knowledge of the maze and classes and progression and etc., they would have told him that's also why charisma was his highest stat. Necromancy is a charisma-based casting class. Like many magical classes, the power doesn't come from understanding some arcane secret, it comes from currying favor with some sort of demon or underworld hellspawn or other creature of extremely nefarious origins. In the case of Jellybean Jenkins, he was the preferred servant of some unholy creature that had long ago instilled him with the power to commit atrocity. Had Boyd or Salia or Gmul known this, they would have approached the following fight very differently. Their goal would have been to somehow prevent Jellybean Jenkins from casting. Gmul would have focused on offensive holy magic, Flean would have focused on enhancing his holy aura to prevent the array of debuffs and fear effects that necromancy specialized in, and Salia would have taken out the additional creatures that were inevitably spawned through necromancy. Boyd probably would have just fired at anything he could see regardless. That wasn't what happened though. Flean approached the fight like he was fighting a fighter, as did Gmul, as did Salia. That meant Salia started firing off as many rounds of armor-piercing flechette as she could, assuming Jellybean had significant amounts of armor ingrained into his hide. Gmul prepared himself to heal the inevitable bleeds and wounds that the others would incur. Flean, anticipating Jellybean to charge him and attempt any sort of disarming move, had positioned his feet firmly into the ground ready to absorb the blow. Boyd pulled his rifle and watched and stared for the most part, which he would have done either way. All of them, even Boyd, although for very different reasons, were quite shocked when instead of charging, Jellybean Jenkins spewed a pitch-black fluid straight up in the sky until the entire world went dark. It was as if he had screamed light from existence. The ink-like fluid coated their entire bubble, before sinking into the ground and staining the valley floor. Boyd stared at Jellybean Jenkins' perfectly white silhouette, the only thing still visible in the darkness. He was entranced. You are afflicted with Wolflord's abominable fear. This effect will not break unless you receive damage or are cleansed by holy magic. You cannot move. Boyd tried to breathe through the panic, but he barely had breath control. While Boyd could not move his limbs, he could flicker his eyes left and right. He realized he could even scan things if needed. Desperately hoping to see Gmul firing off a cleansing spell, or at the least hoping to see Flean charging into battle, he flicked his vision left and right, but instead, he saw them paralyzed in fear right beside him. Normally, this is when he would start pissing himself, but apparently Wolflord fear was strong enough to stop his normal smooth muscle release as well. He flicked his eyes over towards the hill people. They were already swarmed in what he would call zombies or undead. He scanned them quickly while he could. System, Decayed Soldier, Rank 1. Decayed are like a mix of undead and not undead. They aren't undead, but they are also barely alive. They are gross, fleshy bags of what was once a thing, and technically still is, even though it doesn't look like it. Just kill them. They'll thank you. Another crypt next to the hill people opened. It contained a large number of what looked like undead creatures that might fit any of the descriptions of skeleton or ghoul or zombie, but Boyd assumed were more decayed. They were bags of flesh, propped up by a mix of bone and magic. They descended on the hill people in a much larger wave than Boyd had expected. Their crypt had opened, which meant his side had too, so he didn't know how they weren't currently being accosted themselves. Jellybean Jenkins paced in front of the rest of the foray. If you insist on understanding me, then allow me to show you exactly how capable I am. The story told about me is that I became a wolf lord because I conquered the plains. This isn't true. I conquered the plains because I became a wolf lord. Jellybean Jenkins grabbed a piece of black cloth from his pack and wrapped it over his head. Perhaps this look works for you better? Silly Flean. When you told everyone I was a fighter, what did I say? Nothing. I said nothing because I had no reason to correct you. His yellow eyes peered through a tiny slit as he growled from the deepest part of his belly. What about now? Does this align with your vision of me better? Boyd flicked his eyes towards Flean. He looked panicked. Boyd could see the fear in his eyes from more than just the fear spell. The hill people had killed dozens of Decayed, but it hardly mattered. As each Decayed soldier died, the rest of them simply picked up their fallen comrades' weapons and surged forward. They surrounded the hill people who were still fighting back to back, taking out as many as they could. Boyd figured it was finally it for them, but after encircling the group, the Decayed stopped. Jellybean Jenkins continued pacing the bubble. Boyd realized he was still talking. He hadn't really been paying attention. The dog was clearly well into his story at this point, so you can see the bond between a Canis and his emotional energy source is unbreakable. Over time, whether you like it or not, you come to care for them. You come to like them. In some cases, you even come to love them. Martin Jenkins was a good man. He was weak, and he was stupid, but he loved me, and I loved him. His energy, his essence, was the source of my power for years. Without Martin Jenkins, I would be nothing. When I was on Earth, I abused him. I absorbed. I needed. I took. I provided nothing. On the Seven Plains, it was different. I sired children of my own. I raised a brood of terriers that stretched as far as the eye could see. My time was no longer my own. I was yoked to my pack. I came to understand his sacrifice. His efforts. His endless affection. The same way that a child never appreciates their parents until they have children of their own, I never appreciated Martin Jenkins until I was removed from his love. The combination of Jellybean Jenkins' cackling and a brief lapse in Boyd's ADHD allowed him to refocus on the problem at hand as Jellybean Jenkins continued. Necromancy is the oldest form of magic. It is derived from the old gods themselves. There are no arcane arts or technological achievements. This magic is pure. It is direct contact with life and death. Necromancy is beyond the most powerful wizard or the most careful priest. To excel at necromancy, you must connect directly. You must sacrifice. Boyd didn't understand what the hell Jellybean Jenkins was saying, so he passively started fixating on the other side of the battle again. The Decayed had fully disarmed the hill people. Hundreds of the Decayed were dead? Re-dead? Not moving at the least. The remaining ones had bound the hill people though, and were carrying them towards Jellybean Jenkins. He didn't know them, but they had been reasonable, and he was pissed at Flean it had come to this, even if it wasn't truly Flean's fault. From deep within his white curls, Jellybean Jenkins revealed an amulet on a leather cord. He opened it to show a picture of Martin Jenkins, with a small white dog in his lap. I pulled Martin from Earth, transposed him to the Seven Plains, and I strapped him to a table, and I gave him to my gods. Martin loved me with all his heart, and in exchange, I sentenced him to endless torture, a plaything for the most sadistic and juvenile beings in existence. I gave Martin to them, and in exchange, I was made Wolf Lord. I raised an army, I conquered the Seven Plains, and I became the most feared and powerful being on my world. I would have been content to leave it at that. I would have been content to simply rule the Seven Plains, but Jellybean Jenkins continued to explain himself seemingly forever. He had been talking for so long Boyd was now just trying to remember the word for when the insidious villain discussed his entire plan for 5 minutes, while the heroes escaped whatever shackle they had been bound in. What was the word? Speeching? Reciting? Conversing? He couldn't quite remember. Dialoguing? That ain't right. This word was really grating him. He had to remember what it was called. He almost had it, but was distracted by the presence of 5 bundles of cloth being dragged in front of Jellybean by a cadre of decayed. The hill people struggled against their bindings, but couldn't outdo the combined efforts of their captors and their bindings. Boyd studied the knots, trying to figure out how he might help them. Jellybean Jenkins continued, but it was too much. I had tried and I had failed. I needed more power. So I joined your foolish little foray. I decided to enact my plan right here on Zenith. I would control not only the 7 planes, but every plane. I wouldn't just be Wolflord to some, I would be Wolflord to all. I would give my benefactor what they wanted. I would empower them, and through that link I would rule this universe. Little could I have known that I would be so fortunate as to meet our friend Boyd. You see, no lupus superior ever returns to the world they pupate on. When Martin saw me in my current form, he didn't feel love. When I pulled him from his miserable existence to the 7 planes, he tried to run from me, panicked with terror. He would never see me as Jellybean Jenkins. I was a monster. He felt fear, loathing, disgust. That's the life of a dog. They love us when we are docile and tame, and then they reject us in our true form. But with our new friend Boyd, this wasn't the case. Here he was, another human, but without a bond. He was a unique opportunity. A unique chance to be the first lupus ever to fill my anal glands with emotional energy after I finished pupating. I underestimated how much I could use this power. Jellybean Jenkins walked between the members of the group. He stared Boyd in the eyes. Certainly this one was afraid of me, but fear can be overcome with kindness. So I ingratiated myself to him, coddling and cajoling him into falling for me. Sleeping next to him. Enjoying his good boys and his tummy scratches, all the while reaping his emotional energy and storing it. I sent the energy to my benefactor and collected favor. By the time we finished the first level, I was already more powerful than any of you. At this point I am more powerful than all of you. It was all his fault. If Boyd could have talked, he would have laughed. So now here we are. You are all frozen in fear, and I am in the exact place I need to be to complete my task. Jellybean Jenkins' hands glowed back. He wiggled his fingers and then planted them in the dirt. He pulled out 2 enormous black spiders from the ground, yanking them out of the dirt by their mandibles. They chittered about and then skittered over to Flean, who they rapidly began wrapping in black silk. Boyd could see the panic in his eyes as the spiders loaded him onto their back. They walked him back towards Jellybean Jenkins and stood him up. Hello Flean. I need your help with something. I think it will probably kill you, but fear not, your name will ring in the 7 planes, far louder than your precious Ior could ever do. Far greater than your miserable Filari could accomplish. Your death will be a great help to me. He motioned towards his spiders. Fetch me our new friends. The decayed brought the 5 piles of hill people flesh to the spiders, who promptly carried them over to Jellybean Jenkins. The decayed were clearly acting under Jellybean's commands. Like any good necromancer, converting them to his minions had been no trouble. I had an idea for a little experiment, Flean. A test of sorts. The spiders brought the 5 writhing packages full of hill people and set them in front of Jellybean Jenkins. He opened the first set of cloth and a hill person of some sort popped out. The creature swung its fists and feet at Jellybean futilely. He grabbed the creature by its throat and picked it up off the ground. It grunted and swung at him as best as he could. Jellybean began chanting under his breath until his hand glowed black. He extended a finger and pressed it into the hill person's stomach. He ripped the finger upward, spilling the creature's entrails out. Attached to the end of the finger was a glowing white spot that reminded Boyd of Shoal's soul. The little spiders knitted a web around the white glob, encasing it in black spider silk. Jellybean chucked the husk of a corpse at the wall. The spiders brought him an additional bag and the same scene played out. For every hill person, Jellybean Jenkins spilled the creature's guts and then ripped out the creature's soul. The spiders stowed the white glowing spots away, with the bag growing larger and larger with each addition. After the last hill person's soul was collected, the spiders brought the bag to Jellybean and dropped it at his feet. Jellybean scooped the bag off the ground and walked over to Flean. "We have to be gentle about this. I'd hate for this to become a struggle." "I need you to be compliant," Jellybean said. The spider slowly unwrapped Flean's head. They gently began unfurling his neck, pulling it up to its maximum height while sewing the shiny black thread around it to hold it in place. The end result was a spider silk-covered Flean pointed directly in the air like an elongated cannon. The first spider pried open his jaw while the second spider shoved the silken bag into his mouth. The spiders closed his mouth and then began wrapping him tighter and tighter. Flean began to shake and rattle. His eyes went white the same time as the last time Boyd had seen him consume a soul. The spiders used their front legs to initiate peristaltic movements in his throat that forced the souls deep into Flean's gut. Flean's throat continued to undulate and bob like a boa constrictor trying to choke down a meal. Flean's body started convulsing and shaking before a white beam erupted from his mouth, pointed directly upwards. The beam pulsated with intensity and was growing stronger by the second. Flean's fear was broken. He was clearly back in control of his body, but he couldn't shake the spider silk and the pain had left him almost incapacitated, vomiting white light against his will. High in the sky, beyond even his Venian eye's range, Boyd saw the beam stopped. It was focused on a single spot that was glowing with heat. Jellybean Jenkins was smiling as he looked on. The spiders now stood next to him motionlessly awaiting orders. Flean's skin began to melt off his face as the beam of pure whiteness continued, his dark hair singed down to the very tips. Overwhelmed by his condition, his neck fell, sending the combustion beam out into the valley. It blasted the valley walls. More decayed fell out of the cliffs from the new holes. Crypts and caves alike sprang open and decayed poured out of them. Jellybean walked over to Flean and grabbed him by the nape of his to point his head back towards the same spot in the sky. Jellybean's hand was burning but he held tightly and grimaced through the pain. The straps on Flean's cuirass slowly melted until the buckle glowed white-hot and burned into Flean's skin. His armor fell to the floor, his chest naked but for the white-hot beam emanating from him. The beam continued to get brighter and brighter. Flean was left in leg plates, burning so hot they had melted to his skin. His eyes were screaming in pain, but his mouth couldn't form a sound. He writhed in agony, trying to regain some level of control. He tried to shove his mouth closed with his fists, but they flailed hopelessly. The spiders noticed his struggling and shot wrappings at him to try and contain his movements, propping him up like an old mannequin while Jellybean Jenkins pointed his head towards the sky. Then it stopped. The bright spot in the sky finally cracked. The beam continued out into space and the shards of invisible nothing fell around Boyd. He didn't know what they were, but he was being gently pelted with some invisible force. He was hoping it would break the fear spell, but it didn't cause any damage. It was like being showered in glitter dust. The dirt underneath their feet began to shake. 1,000 decayed corpses emerged from the hill above them in a perfect formation. They marched directly to Jellybean Jenkins and propped him up on their shoulders, then they began climbing on one another, lifting him farther and farther into the air. Jellybean stood unwaveringly upon the ball of decayed as bones, flesh, and sinew all knitted themselves together. The ball of flesh grew and grew until Jellybean sat atop a ball of bodies that was 20 feet in circumference, and dense as iron. A throne of bones and tissue appeared atop the ball and Jellybean sat down upon it. "It's a shame none of you can move. It would be customary to bow. A wolf lord sits atop his throne before you, the first to crack the Sultan barrier. You sit in deference to the most powerful necromancer in the universe." Jellybean Jenkins laughed, which sounded like a mixture of yips and barks and growls. "Maybe you don't recognize a king without an army? We can fix that, I believe." Jellybean Jenkins' eyes closed and he began to chant. The ground in front of him grew and grew until it formed a cone, a tiny volcano-like structure in the ground. The cone pulsed and then erupted in blood. It sloshed over the sides and covered everyone else in tiny splotches. The fountain glowed a deeper and more fluorescent color until it became so bright Boyd had to blink or it would burn his eyes. The first capsule hit about 6 feet from him. It fell open to reveal what looked like a very large and very evil beagle that immediately popped out and held a horrible noise. The capsules kept hitting the ground for nearly a minute, each of them containing some sort of giant dog beast that resembled Jellybean Jenkins, but a slightly different breed of dog. The pack assembled in front of him, scratching, clawing, baying, and fighting. Boyd estimated there were at least 250 additional dogs by the time the capsules stopped landing. Jellybean motioned towards his spiders, "And you too, if you could quickly go switch those levers, I can sense an entire army awaiting me behind those cave walls. We should let that dusk dragon in that cage back there out as well, he might also be sympathetic to our cause." The spiders shook off the dirt and rock and quickly went down each side of the bubbles in the valley, switching the levers from right to left. The doors closed behind them, but the crypts on either side of the valley opened. The decayed poured out of all of them. They charged towards the living, crawling over one another, desperate to reach edible flesh. Jellybean Jenkins chanted for a few seconds and then held. The decayed stopped running and formed a line along the edge of the valley. In the back of the valley, Boyd heard a massive roar and the gigantic door flew open. From within came a large gray and purple lizard. Tentacles covered its back. They grasped onto the nearby walls of the valley and pulled the dragon forward. Boyd thought that seemed bad. He quickly scanned the creature. System, Dusk Dragon, Boss, Soul Catcher, Dusky, Rank 133. Dusk dragons are an uncommon sight. Dragons in general aren't that common, but the dusky ones are a real treat. A true rarity. Unlike the monotone color-based dragon clans such as Ruby or Sapphire, dusk dragons aren't even real dragons. They are swamp creatures who just happen to look a lot like a lizard. Whereas dragons are usually thoughtful, rational, reasonable creatures who just don't want to be bothered, dusk dragons are less dangerous, but far more aggressive. You can think of this creature as a thoughtless husk of a dragon with one emotion, hungry. Boyd stared at the creature again after reading the scan. What was monotone anyway? Wait a second. That's it. Rock rot hits you for 5 damage. Rock rot cannot be cured without essence of earth. Your fear is broken. You can move. You can act. I remember. It's called monologuing. That's what the bad guys do. They monologue. Got it. Man, that was bothering me. Boyd yelled. Jellybean Jenkins looked at him from atop his throne. Time stood still for an instant, then all hell broke loose. In that exact moment, Boyd was thinking of Lara. He always thought of her when the rock rot hit. He thought about how she held him, how her hard and sharp features belied the wonderful and soulful individual underneath. How despite the fact that they never shared a language, they would always share the language of love. She might have been made of rocks, and slightly mossy, and almost 300 times his weight, but she was soft where it counted and she was all woman. They'd made love half a dozen times that night. He had to pay for the first one, she had dues to use the room, but everything after that was just them. He'd had sexual partners, he'd had girlfriends, he'd even been in love. Something about Lara was different. He missed her. As he dreamt about that one beautiful night with Lara, chaos reigned around him. Xena? Yeah. It's me. Listen, I have direct access now. We can talk mostly as needed. With the Sultan barrier down, I can get more done. It also means I have a lot to get accomplished though. I won't be around all the time, but I will try to be here when you need me. Trust me, right now is one of those times. I know you are probably freaking out, but all hope isn't lost. I need you to do these things, in this exact order, or you're gonna die and everyone around here is gonna die. You don't want that. I don't want that. Jellybean Jenkins sneered at him and pointed from atop his throne. The 2 black spiders came rushing towards him. He pulled his revolver and shot Salia in the shoulder with a glancing blow. He figured that even at this range, her armor would prevent any serious damage. He followed up with a quick shot to what he assumed was Gmol's foot and then leapt backwards and tried to set the closest spider for targeted ambush. It wouldn't work as the spiders were very aware of his presence, so he frantically started pulling the trigger. The first few shots went considerably wide, but he hit the most proximal spider right in the head with the third one. It stunned the creature momentarily. Boyd fired another round at it and the spider's health plummeted, but it began charging again. Almost instantaneously, both spiders exploded in a yellow glow. Boyd looked up to see chain reactions of decayed exploding all around them. Yellow pops began happening faster and faster throughout the battlefield. Boyd looked over to see Gmol was glowing brightly yellow. The eye/vents/anus things on the top of him were smoking with a purple steam. He continued to light up everything on the battlefield. Boyd glanced back towards the big cave and deep scanned the Dusk Dragon. System, deep scan. Dusk Dragon, boss, soul catcher, dragon. Rank 413, 414, 415, 416, scan failure, rank increasing at a logical rate. Check scan conditions. Scan halted. Gmol, stop. The dragon has soul catcher. The pops got faster and faster though across the valley, decayed started falling like dominoes. Gmol was lit up like a Tijuana whorehouse, and he didn't seem like he was going to stop. Whatever was going on with him prevented him from thinking about the results of his actions. Salia, get him to stop. He looked to where Salia should have been, but she was gone, having left only a puff of smoke. Boyd looked up and saw what he would define as a flotilla of zeppelins in the air. They had a massive logo painted on the balloon portion of things that reminded him of the logo outside of Glipglop's Inn. Salia was already jetting towards them at top speed. He saw projectiles fly from her VMR and into the blimps, but they remained aloft, returning fire with a range of explosions and random projectiles that looked like she was attacking 6 different versions of the Death Star. She wasn't going to be of much help. Plan B, Xena said. Just like we talked about. System, you have snorted 3 pulverized jet crystals. Time dilated by 150% for 45 seconds. System, you are now addicted to jet. Boyd felt the world slow down. It was incredible. He felt amazing. He could see everything so much clearer. Why had he ever viewed the world any other way? He reached in his bag for more jet, but remembered he had something else to do first. So he began rummaging through his pack, trying to find his ring. Things tumbled out of his grasp, but he was moving what felt like at the speed of light. A random poodle mix flew from his peripheral vision and swiped a massive claw at him. The jet slowed things down just enough to keep it from flat-out eviscerating him, but it left a small cut through the gut of his leathers. The creature landed in front of him with a thud. It raised a sword and thrust to stab him, but Boyd could see it coming. In fact, he could see it coming before it happened. The creature's movement was outlined in black before it even occurred. He started dodging as soon as the poodle mix had committed. He pulled Party Marty from its leather scabbard and spun left, swinging it as hard as he could. He hit the creature firmly in the lower back, sending it reeling to the ground. He could feel Party Marty splitting individual cell after individual cell. It sent shivers of delight up his spine. He pulled his revolver from its holster, jammed it against the creature's head, and emptied all 5 chambers. The poodle's face sprayed out onto the battlefield in front of them in slow-motion chunks as it collapsed to the ground, extremely dead. Boyd flicked the chamber open and closed it, all he needed to do to ensure it was reloaded, and then shoved it back in its sheath. He reached his hand deep into his pack and pulled out what he was looking for. He slipped on the cosplayer's ring. The maze, level 1, portcullis, a few days ago. I'm looking for a magic strength ring. Y'all got one of those by any chance? My foray told me I can't do most magic stuff on account of the fact I'm a monk, unassigned. We do not. I do have a magic ring though. This one here. Extraordinary quality. What do you think? Boyd examined the ring but couldn't make much of it. Go ahead and scan it, the merchant said. System, cosplayer's ring, extraordinary. Ever wanted to pretend like you were someone else? Try this cosplayer's ring. Only available on level 1 of the maze, this ring allows you to act as if you were any other class you had the option of selecting during your initial assignment for 15 seconds. You will retain your current rank regardless of experience requirement differences. All positive and negative effects associated with class changes are negated when the ring destroys itself. So wait, I can do any other class? Do I keep any of the bad stuff if there was something I didn't want from that class? Nope. You never actually become that class. You just gain their abilities. It's a neat little trick. Sometimes groups that are missing a thief or rogue pick one up so they can use it later on. They are only available this level though, so if you want one, you better grab it now. I'll think about it, Boyd said. He'd need to raise some more money, but he definitely wanted that ring. System, cosplayer's ring engaged. Please select a temporary class. You will not become this class, but will have access to all their abilities. Option 1, Monk, unassigned. You currently have ranks in this class. Option 2, Explosives Handler. Option 3, Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. Boyd selected Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. System, you have selected a class that is antithetical to your foray's stated mission. If you accept this choice, you will be automatically removed from your foray. Boyd mentally clicked yes. System, you have been removed from Flean's fine foray for the Filari. System, your current class is Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. This will last 40.2 more seconds, 15s, plus time dilation from jet crystals. He hoped Grandma would understand. System, your current class is Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. This will last 37.5 seconds, 15s, plus time dilation from jet crystals. The initial few seconds of the transformation were too confusing to process, but now he could feel himself growing. It was weird to grow with the persistent time dilation though. He'd see how he was going to grow before it even happened. The time dilation was so intense with this much jet in him that it was like the entire world was echoing before something happened, a series of vision and images that were ready to occur any second. The world got much smaller until the decayed were like mice, and he was nearly as tall as the blimps in the air. His vision lit up with new skills so fast he didn't know what to do. He couldn't read their names, but he could feel how to use them. He remembered what Xena had said, even a rank 1 empowered envoy is far more powerful than the overwhelming majority of classes at extremely high ranks though, so there is still some upside here. He was almost rank 30 between all his classes and missteps, and because of his ring, that translated directly to his Empowered Envoy of Ashmedai temporary class status. For 30-ish more seconds, he was a rank 30 Empowered Envoy of the Hells, the equivalent of a greater Lord of Hell with eons of war behind him. He looked around the battlefield for Jellybean and his weird ball of dead shit/throne that he was been traveling around on, but couldn't find him. Many of the dogs were well off into the distance, and he assumed Jellybean was probably at the front of that pack. It was a shame, he'd have to deal with that later. He had a more immediate problem. He stormed across the valley towards the dusk dragon. He had to kill it now. The situation was out of control and it would be impossible if Gmul didn't stop feeding it power. The decayed claws at his feet, but they couldn't hurt him. With his new massive size, he crushed them by the dozens under his steps. Death notification started raining in so fast he had to mentally halt his scroll speed to almost non-existent. As he got closer to the dragon, he pulled a massive spear from his back and threw it as hard as he could towards the end of the valley where the dragon was. It hurtled towards the dragon with what seemed like an infinite level of force, but his throw was just far enough off that it clipped the dragon's leathery wing, flying straight through and into the cliff wall behind it. The cliff exploded in response, piles of decayed pieces flying out of the crumbling walls. Their remnant souls coalesced upon the dusk dragon, and it grew. Boyd found himself in a parlor of sorts. There were comfortable seats, there were bookshelves lined with books, there was a bar that was fully stocked. The gentle hum of relaxing music played in the background. The temperature was perfect, the air was perfect, everything was perfect. He was wearing a tuxedo, which was odd because he'd never worn one before in his life. His shoes were shiny and polished, a fine patent leather. The bow tie was choking him, so he tried to loosen it, but found it wouldn't budge. He stood up, trying to get his bearings. The table in front of him held a brown beverage that he thought was most likely whiskey from the smell. He hadn't had a drink in a bit, so he poured himself one. There wasn't any Coca-Cola available, so he just dumped a few extra ice cubes in and started drinking it. To his surprise, it didn't burn at all. It tasted like honey and caramel, perfectly balanced. The door opened and a man walked in. He was gorgeous. Boyd couldn't help but stare. Everything about him was exceptional. He moved with elegance. His clothes were spotless. He had a mustache with not one single hair out of place. Boyd could tell he was muscular beneath his own tuxedo, but it wasn't intimidating. His eyes were perfectly black with just a tiny speck of white at the edges. Boyd wanted to hear him speak. He wanted to be friends. Hello. His voice was as beautiful and majestic as he was. Hi. You may call me Ashmedai. We have something we need to discuss. I'll talk about whatever you want if I can get another glass of this whiskey, Boyd said. Ashmedai grabbed the bottle and set it between them. Let me pour myself a drink too then, the demon said. System, your current class is Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. This will last 29.2 more seconds. The dusk dragon had slipped out of his grip. It was like trying to hold a mixture of solids, liquids, and gas at the same time. Sometimes it leaked through his hands. Sometimes he couldn't even make contact. It reformed a distance away and covered him in its purple breath. The solution burned, but he knew it couldn't really hurt him. His life regenerated too quickly in this form. He has summoned his mace from the hells themselves, ripping it from the earth. He held the giant mace in two hands. The tip was aflame, a massive diamond-shaped head of fire. He slammed it into the ground and activated his ability Ground Slam. The blast wave extended outwards for several hundred feet. Decayed fell by the hundreds, the fleshier ones melted, the bonier ones exploded. The dusk dragon leapt backwards, but the blast wave hit knocked it against the nearby valley walls. More decayed bodies flew out of the cliffs. More of them died. The dusk dragon grew. Ashmedai and Boyd sat opposite one another, sipping the fine whiskey and discussing the finer points of the battle. This is such a waste of our power. You could do so much more entertaining things right now, Ashmedai said. I have like 20 seconds left, man. What can I really get done in 20 seconds? Ashmedai scoffed. Well, to be fair, I don't think you can beat it in your current state regardless. I can try, Boyd said. Would you like to know its current power level? It's quite impressive actually. Pass. System, your current class is Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. This will last 18.1 more seconds. Boyd and the dusk dragon were destroying everything in the valley. Aircraft of all sorts fell from the sky burning. Boyd was doing everything he could to keep it occupied, but the insurgent interlopers kept getting too close. Every time something died, the dusk dragon got stronger. The collateral damage from his massive power was going to be the death of him. The tentacles on the dusk dragon's back raged through the mountain sides, liberating that many more souls to empower it. The dragon shot flaming bouts of steam and acid from its mouth. Its tail whipped back and forth, slicing everything in its path. Boyd didn't know how, but he understood how to kill it. He would never be able to beat it face to face, the creature would just melt through his blows. Instead, he jumped as high as he could, hundreds of feet in the air, and cast a spell called Meteorite, transforming into a flaming ball, then rapidly flying into the creature's back. He landed with a fiery explosion, taking a large chunk out of the creature's flesh. It started to congeal and reform almost immediately as he regained his footing. Boyd's returned to form and used his massive flaming mace to strike down on the creature's spine. He felt it crack. The creature slumped to the ground. Boyd jumped to its head to finish the job but was swatted away by the dusk dragon's claw. It rolled onto its stomach and Boyd saw the indentations he had made slowly turn from solid to liquid to gas and then back to liquid and back to solid. It had completely healed the wound and was now preparing to breathe the purple acidic fire on him again. He dodged 2 swipes from its respective claws and leapt out of the way of its maw. He clubbed it on the side of the head twice, dismantling one of its horns. The dragon's tail caught him from behind and sent him flailing forward. "You are channeling a dramatic excess of my energy. I don't know how you did this, but I'd like you to stop. It's a ring. It lets me use any class I could access. It will only last about 15 more seconds." Ashmedai sat down next to the fireplace. He pulled a nearby poker from its stand and started moving the wood around the fireplace. I can tolerate a bit longer of this. I might prefer to turn this little font of power off though. I would need a favor in return for keeping it open. You can't have this much for free. The ring said I don't have to do anything. No negative effects. Ashmedai cleared his throat incredulously. "And you believe a simple magic ring is stronger than a leader of the Hells? If you would like to test this theory, you can. You may simply leave. Just say the word." Ashmedai smiled at him. "What do I need to do then?" "System, your current class is Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. This will last 11.6 more seconds." In the air, between the metal blimps, he saw a nuclear-esque explosion. The blast mushroomed into the sky and down below. The blimps themselves were caught ablaze. Salia's VMR looked tiny from this height. She was too close when she fired and the blast knocked her out of the sky as well. He didn't see her land. One of the blimps was heading towards them. He tried to bat it towards the dusk dragon with his mace, but it crashed well beyond his target, likely destroying several thousand more decayed. He understood the consequence of this. The dusk dragon grew larger yet again. It was now much bigger than him. The tentacles flung out of its back, shredding his skin like razor wire. They embedded in his flesh, digging into his muscles. His aura of demonic flame burned the creature. He pumped as much mana as he could into the ability, trying to escape the dusk dragon's grasp. He could smell the dragon's tentacles burning, but more came. Many more. He had to finish the fight soon. The dusk dragon was gaining ranks too quickly. Every mistake he made was punished increasingly more. He was running out of options. "I'll do it. If that's what you need, I'll do it." Ashmedai smiled. "You understand what you are committing to, correct? These bargains must be entered into with a full understanding of what they mean or they will not hold." They'd been arguing the semantics of the deal for what felt like hours. Boyd was no lawyer, but he'd bought half his possessions at garage sales and thrift shops. He couldn't argue, but he could damn well dicker. "I'm signing a deal with the devil." "I get it. Let's move this along. Gimme a pen." "Deal's a deal. We don't sign with pens here." Ashmedai took a metal poker out of the fireplace. "I will need you to remove your shirt and then hold very still." System, your current class is Empowered Demonic Envoy of Ashmedai. This will last 4.1 more seconds. His chest burned. That was half of the deal. Power surged through him. That was the other half of the deal. He found the skill he was looking for. He didn't really trust the demon. This was his last resort. One final chance to save his life. The dusk dragon now had thousands of ranks. He had no idea how powerful it was. He knew he was lucky to still be alive. System, skill, Apocalypse Bomb. A spell that causes a localized apocalypse. The level of apocalyptic destruction cannot accurately be predicted, but is dependent on the amount of mana used to cast the spell. Results may vary. Warning, this spell may result in the utter destruction of the user, their family, their planet, etc. The Hells are not responsible for unfortunate outcomes associated with apocalypse bombs. He didn't have too much mana left, but it was enough to give him pause. If he undershot it, then the dragon would live and he would die. If he overshot it, everything would die, including him. He pumped the entirety of his remaining mana into the apocalypse bomb. A buzzing blue orb appeared in his hands, and he waited until he could throw it. The jet was wearing off, but he could still see different occurrences. He jumped in the air backwards and threw the bomb at the dragon's feet. Anticipating an explosion, he covered his eyes, ears, and face as he could, but that wasn't what occurred. Instead, everything within several hundred meters of the bomb explosion site was simply gone. The ground, the valley walls, most of the dusk dragon, thousands of decayed, and more. It hadn't even made a sound, or perhaps, it was so loud he was now deaf. He couldn't tell. The dusk dragon was dead. Notifications rained down the edge of his vision, even through his massively diminished scroll speed. "So we're good?" Boyd asked. "We're good, as you would say." "In fact, I would say I am great now," Ashmedai said. "But that is only now. And soon, I will be in touch." The parlor began melting into the ground. As the illusion faded away, Boyd got a glimpse of the hells at the edges of his vision. He'd made a terrible mistake. Life 22 of 154. Mana 0 of 72. He didn't know where he was, but apparently he'd been blasted most of the way across the battlefield. The dusk dragon had been pressed up against one of the valley walls when he threw the apocalypse bomb, although he'd lost any sort of orientation at this point, so he wasn't sure which wall or where he'd gone. He had a rough idea of directions, based on the hole in the Sultan barrier, but even that wasn't particularly helpful. His HUD had been raining in achievements and messages like crazy. He had no idea what they all said. He didn't have time to look. In the corner of his character sheet where he managed his ranks it said, plus 196 waiting. He didn't do the math, but it meant he was well above rank 200 now. He had acquired a massive amount experience, several thousand times more than he had gained in total thus far. He also had several dozen new achievements that he dismissed for now. That seemed good. He hoped he lived long enough to use some of it. The jet effect was over. The jet hangover was brutal. Where once the world echoed for him, giving him crucial seconds to make any decision he needed to, he now felt like he was trapped in oil. Worse yet, it hurt to move anything. It hurt to breathe. It hurt to even think. It hurt to see for that matter. On top of the jet hangover, he was back to being just Boyd. The apocalypse bomb blast had deleted a large portion of the dusk dragon. The remaining corpse, a portion of the dusk dragon that hadn't been fully deleted from existence, was smoldering in the dirt, several hundred meters below him, half gone with the non-explosion. The valley walls were also obliterated. Nothing was alive where the apocalypse bomb had gone off. He pushed a finger in his ear to figure out if he was deaf or not. He quickly realized he wasn't deaf, other noises were just being drowned out by a massive sound that he couldn't place. He swung his head around, immediately felt like vomiting at the sensation, and then looked up to see a burgeoning new set of problems. Foremost, miles across the battlefield, a horde of about 100 dog beasts had formed a pack and were charging towards him. He didn't know their purpose, or even if he was what they were coming towards, but it seemed unlikely he would survive the encounter. If any of them were remotely of the strength of Jellybean Jenkins, there would be no way to win. Second, the destruction of the valley walls had led to some serious localized geologic issues. Foremost, the river that had flowed in the area above them through some sort of magical or unique geographic happenstance was now functioning under normal gravity again and had begun spilling into the valley. Previously, the river was prevented from entering this area via the walls of the valley, and had somehow failed to erode its way down to lower ground. That was no longer the case on account of the very large holes in the valley walls. The river roared into the valley, rapidly filling it with water. This also explained the noise, as a river that looked like a large branch of the Amazon back on Earth was now filling what amounted to a bathtub in comparison, with Boyd standing in the bottom of it. Finally, on top of all of this, shit was piling through the Sultan barrier still. There were planes and projectiles and indescribable whatnots, all of them blasting into Zenith's gravity at top speed, and commonly exploding in the process. The sky quickly turned into a war zone as groups fought to enter Zenith's atmosphere, but success rates seemed low. Debris from all of the would-be interlopers was falling from the sky in droves. Some of the items were hitting the ground and emitting creatures that ranged from things Boyd had seen to things that he couldn't even imagine, but a larger portion of the objects smashing into the ground were either already destroyed or were actively burning. Boyd had to assume most of it was not going to survive contact. He still hadn't seen Salia again, and as much as she had shit on him, he worried for her safety. Was she one of the random flaming projectiles striking the battlefield? The water had gone from his feet to his ankles in a matter of seconds. He could barely move as it was, so long-term treading water wasn't going to be a great option. The jet hangover should end soon, but he wasn't sure if it would even matter. He was weighed down by guns, Party Marty, his leather armor and more. He could strip to the bone and probably survive it, but at this point he wasn't sure if he could keep replacing everything he'd worked for on a nearly daily basis. The dogs were still approaching too, 4 of them had broken off from the pack and were heading for him directly. He wasn't sure where the others were heading, but it didn't matter. He pulled his rifle and tried to draw a bead on the one in front. He fired but missed widely. He actioned the lever on his rifle as fast as he could, but he could barely focus enough to shoot. With the jet hangover pounding in his head, he slipped in the ever-increasing water at his feet, but stumbled his way back up. The dogs were already halfway across the field at this point and closing fast. He pulled his rifle to his shoulder and fired again, catching the front dog in the chest. It went tumbling backwards, but so did he, unable to maintain his footing. The dog was up and running again before Boyd could get back on his own feet, although he could tell it was in bad shape. He fired again and missed wide. The jet hangover has receded to almost nothing by this point, but he was still woozy from the damage alone. He tapped back a few more health and pulled his rifle back up to his shoulder to try and get one last shot in before he switched to his revolvers. Party Marty had fell off his back and was somewhere in the dirt beside him. It didn't matter. He couldn't fight these things toe-to-toe regardless. Across the field of battle, Boyd looked over to see that the water had stopped moving. All of it. The river breaking into the valley was a stroke of luck. If nothing else, it kept things nice and humid. Zult didn't like dry weather. He transposed directly into the valley itself from a growing puddle of water. His fleshy green legs appearing first, then his flowing red cloak and finally his head, adorned with a helmet made of rhenamium. The first thing he did was take control of the local resources. It was a relatively small volume compared to what he was used to dealing with back home. The river stopped and he diverted its flow to himself. Now, the full force of the river lay motionless behind him. He had wanted to do battle with the Dusk Dragon, it had become sufficiently powerful, but this would be a different sort of fun. There wouldn't be the thrill of the challenge, but it would be a good introduction to Zenith. The dog in the front of the pack, much larger than Zult was, ran towards him ready to swing his axe. Zult didn't bother moving, he simply stared. The dog stopped motionless and fell to the ground, wet with blood and urine and fluid. Water was his to command. He had simply removed all of it from the approaching dog, instantly and spontaneously, from every pore. The remaining corpse was leaking badly, staining the ground with a mixture of water and dilute fluids. The other dogs were still charging, but were several dozen meters away, so he hopped onto a small stump and began casting his spell. The water rose up behind him, hundreds of feet tall, and then sped forward and washed over the attacking crew. They were cast aside, many of them dying in the wave, the rest drowning in the pools. He still sat atop his stump, watching the battle. He quickly formed the river into a water elemental, which was doing battle with the remaining dogs. They couldn't hurt it, and Zult didn't feel like extending things any longer than needed, so the elemental simply placed large orbs of water around each of their heads and watched them struggle as they drowned on dry land. They pawed and kicked at the ball of water, desperately trying to pull it off their heads, but it remained steadfast. After a few minutes, they all fell over dead, and the water elemental washed back into the dirt. He hopped a few feet forward and pulled in some water to encase himself in ice. This was one of his least favorite tricks, it always left him cold, but it was highly effective. He had spotted the Serpent ship as soon as he transposed in, so he assumed the missile attacks would be coming any second. No matter what else was happening, if the Serpent knew he was there, they would attack him first. This was smart thinking. He would drown them all. Serpent missiles moved in a serpentine pattern and were hard to shoot down. Because of their erratic movement, they were notoriously inaccurate. These missiles were no different. They landed a few meters off and the ice block easily prevented the blast from damaging him. He looked into the water at his feet, still entombed in ice, and scryed the position of the Serpent warship. He triangulated its position using the direction of the missiles and his scrying water to estimate where it would be and how fast it was moving. A spear of ice shot directly into the air below the ship. He wouldn't be able to pierce the hard hull of the Serpent ship, but he didn't need to do so. The ice began growing around the ship. Water was seeping into every nook and cranny. It was only a few seconds until the ship began to lose its airworthiness and came crashing down. More dead Serpent. A nice bonus to the day. He hopped back onto his stump with the Serpent threat eliminated and looked around. Across the battlefield, a severely injured Boyd Bridges was trying to pry a dog's teeth from his shoulder. Another dog lay dead next to him and the third and fourths were now encircling Boyd Bridges until they could find an easy opening. Zoult casually began hopping in that direction, but it seemed like it would resolve itself shortly. Life, 41 of 154. Mana, 0 of 78. He mostly firing off pot shots, trying to keep them away. Something about the pistol really bothered them. The poison must be highly painful. He'd kill the lead dog shortly after it arrived. Party Marty was stuck firmly in the back of the creature's head. At this point, he was mostly just pacing around in circles, firing pot shots, trying to keep the dogs back. He was spamming mana tap mentally, hoping to get enough life back to kill these things. They were not nearly as strong as Jelly Bean, but they were every bit as vicious. Life 154/154. Boyd counted 3 dead. He looked around to find the last remaining dog, but all he saw was a large vegetation-covered slime mold. He waved at Gmol and then yelled, "Thanks for the heal." Gmol was sprouting all sorts of beautiful, oddly shaped flowers out of him and had grown in mass. His internal rune was largely covered, but it shot out a thumbs-up sign. Boyd gave a thumbs-up back. Gmol went back to his business and slimed his way forward, planting small flowers on the myriad corpses around the battlefield. Boyd correctly assumed that was all the help he was going to get. Boyd scrambled to find his revolver before the next dog could attack. Since he changed to Bushwhacker, he consistently underestimated his agility, but in the moment he didn't have time to think. He rolled towards where the revolver had fell, fired the remaining rounds towards the approaching dog on a second roll and scrambled over to where his party Marty was still embedded in the first dog's head. He vaulted over the corpse and placed his foot on the creature's head to pry the billhook out. The dog had already caught up with him though, and slashed him in the back with a giant claw. It followed this up with a kick to the back of his head that sent him sprawling. Life, 81 of 154. Boyd reflexively mana tapped some of his health back and then started dodging the dog's continued blows. The dog was faster than him, and landed glancing blows repeatedly, but couldn't make solid contact. Boyd was hoping to avoid this, but he pulled another jet crystal from his pocket, crushed it in his hand, and snorted it as fast as he could. The world slowed down again and the fight became a dance. System, your jet addiction has become less manageable. System, achievement, but why would I do that when I can choose jet? Whatever addictive chemical is on your native planet probably doesn't hold a candle to jet. You are on an extremely slippery slope, and given your prior history, I'm guessing we are at most 2 weeks from finding you in a back alley with tears in your eyes and some random creature's sexual protuberance inside whichever one of your holes they prefer. You might want to slow down on this one. No experience granted, but I'm guessing you are going to get plenty of experience out of this deal. He immediately felt better. The jet hit faster than a 22-year-old Mike Tyson on a coke bender. It made the world easy. He hadn't noticed when he wasn't on jet, but now that he was high, he followed the dog's movements with ease. The dog overextended his legs on every slash. Boyd preemptively moved left and then dumped his entire magazine into the creature's leg. The creature tried to leap backwards during the shooting, but its leg gave out. Boyd pulled Party Marty from his scabbard and chopped deep into the other leg. He tried to pull Party Marty out, but it was buried deep. He decided to finish the fight as quickly as he could since the jet was already starting to wane. He pulled the rifle and pressed it against the dog's head and smiled. Then it rocketed 300 feet in the air on a pillar of water. The dog yipped and whined as it bounced around on the giant puddle of water. A 2-foot-wide bullfrog that was about 8 inches tall in a red cape and a metal helmet hopped up to Boyd. "Please don't kill him. We might need him." The frog spoke with a perfect Midwestern accent, and could well have been from northern Kansas. Boyd had kin there, and they sounded just like the frog. "Wow. You're kinda adorable. Also, that thing's going to die. It's full of poison." The jet hangover hit and Boyd started projectile vomiting. The frog looked up in the sky. "The poisons are aqueous. I removed them. When your jet condition resolves, we should talk. My name is Zult, the eternally damp, supreme hydrophysicist of the Numidian domain." Boyd spewed vomit into the water below. He wiped his mouth and said, "I'm Boyd. Just Boyd." Boyd sat down on a nearby clear spot and looked up, waiting on the jet hangover to resolve. Above him, the sky was buzzing with the presence of thousands upon thousands of tiny ships piling through the Salton barrier. Around him, the world was burning. In the center of the valley, there was a massive plume of water that went further than the eye could see. It was the breadth of a football field and was pulling in sources of water from almost 360 degrees that coalesced into the massive fountain. Boyd had recovered from the jet hangover, but he felt awful. He was vibrating with some sort of sickness he couldn't understand. He sat next to Zult on a single stump. He was currently fighting an odd compulsion to pet the frog. The Salton barrier cannot be repaired by this method alone. My fountain of water will hold things out for a while, but not forever. The good news is that the barrier appears to be slowly resolving itself. I am hopeful I can keep but a minimal number of additional creatures from entering Zenith." Boyd stared blankly at the frog. He felt like he was going to shit his pants. "Next matter, I should explain myself. You might think I bear you ill will, but I promise you this is not the case. In fact, I have been watching you closely since you arrived on Zenith. My people's ability to combine magic and water is unparalleled. We are particularly capable of far-seeing through water. We call it scrying, although you would probably just think of it as sorcery. It has given us access to watching happenstances on Zenith even when I am not here. Unfortunately, it appears like the ability to watch the happenings of Zenith will now be present for nearly everyone, as the sky has filled with messengers, drones, battle ravens, and frog knows how many other tiny devices for transmitting information. No matter for now. I have come to believe that our little problem with transposition, the one wherein you usurped my spot, was not your fault. Not only could you not have done this intentionally, but I have increasingly solid data that supports the idea that the mishap was actually quite intentional. This is an odd question, but by any chance have you been contacted by anyone since arriving here that struck you as odd?" Boyd was definitely going to shit his pants. His bowels were gurgling. He wasn't sure how to excuse himself, so simply he stood up, walked behind a charred piece of some nearby spacecraft and proceeded to paint the ground brown. He wasn't sure if it was the jet or the constant fear and anxiety, but he was in the grips of gut-crunching diarrhea for several minutes. Zult merely followed him and kept talking, avoiding the increasingly large pile of diarrhea spewing forth from Boyd. "Very well then. My understanding is that you are the only one who knows the true depths of Jellybean Jenkins' power. We have been keeping a close eye on you, Sir Boyd. What you lack in skill, you make up for in cunning. I believe that you and I can help each other. I have been tasked with saving Sir Fleon, and I believe your help could be invaluable. With your more intimate knowledge of the Wolf Lord, I believe we might be able to best him. So what do we do from here? We will assemble a new foray. I can serve as foray leader, given my rank and reputation. We will need to parse through the remaining combatants using the mercenary system. Because neither of us entered Zenith as foray leaders, we will have to apply for a new foray through system. This comes with a substantial gold cost, but I can afford to pay. We will need to be very thoughtful about who we invite, as after we have rescued Fleon, we will want to replace one of the members with him. We can possibly find some person who is willing to spend a limited amount of time with us. Mercenaries that provide this service are usually available by this level. I am assuming Jellybean Jenkins has absconded away with Fleon to deeper levels, thus we will need to follow them. I do not know his goals, but whatever they are, we should focus on stopping him. A rogue necromancer in control of the High Paladin of the Filari is no trifling matter. We should be able to track them if we include a ranger with the track foray skill. Although anyone that specialized in tracking might have miserable combat skills, I am more than capable of guiding us to at least the 100th level with my powers alone. I don't anticipate we should worry on that front. Zult's throat bubbled and let out a burp-like noise that Boyd thought was probably laughter. We should look to garner at least a few frontline fighters who can keep enemies away from me while I use my sorcery. What say you, Sir Boyd? Shall we be off to the nearest hub city to recruit? I am thinking the name of the name Zult's zany zoological zealots. Would this suffice? Boyd wiped his ass with a nearby piece of fluttering cloth-like material and then washed his hand in a clean puddle a few feet away. When he was done, he emerged from behind the wreckage and looked at the magical frog. No. Boyd began walking towards the edge of the valley where his group would have exited if not for the carnage. What do you mean, Sir Boyd? We need to rescue Fleon of the Filari. The Empress demands it. We must purge Zenith of this menace. I command you. Come back. Boyd kept walking away and flipped the middle finger. Rockrot hits you for 5 damage. Rockrot cannot be cured without essence of earth. Jellybean Jenkins. Jellybean Jenkins felt himself being lifted out of his body. Zilzaluzan did not request meetings or answer summons. He plucked you directly from wherever you stood to wherever he was, and there you were. Jellybean Jenkins approached Zilzaluzan with defiant reverence, hiding his indignity as best he could. He hated the creature. He wanted nothing more than to watch it squirm a slow and painful death. When he controlled Zenith, his first action would be to bring his full force to bear upon this creature until it begged for mercy, and then he would kill it. Zilzaluzan, my lord, you beckoned me. Why did you have the Filari destroy the Sultan barrier? I believed this to be our goal. You stated as much. Why do it myself if I can command another, a lesser being, to do this for me? A novel choice, Jellybean Jenkins. You sent another to perform your task because they were more able. This is delegation. The massive pile of black tentacles thumped the ground. But I do not need lieutenants. The creature shot out a black tentacle and grabbed Jellybean before he could move. The price for defiance is death. The tiny prods on Zilzaluzan tentacles started to protrude, lancing Jellybean Jenkins' skin. The tentacle swarmed over his body, leaving small bits of rent flesh. The wounds began bleeding faster and faster, but Jellybean wasn't going to let him see the pain. He wouldn't give him that satisfaction. He grunted, this was the most effective and fastest way. I live to serve your goals. He spat the last word, me lord. Zilzaluzan tossed him to the ground. Do not let the paladin die. We may have use for him yet. You are dismissed. Jellybean Jenkins focused his mind on Zenith and left the immortal realm of Zilzaluzan. Ior contemplated this change. The wolf had done it a favor. It would have been hard to convince the paladin to destroy the Sultan barrier, even as sniveling as it was. The wolf didn't need to know that though. Watching its two servants struggle against each other was enjoyable. It would let this continue as long as it needed. Good help was hard to find. Fleein. The Wolf Lord has encased him in an impenetrable amount of spider silk. He struggled day and night at first, but he had long since lost the strength to struggle. He could feel himself atrophying. It wasn't the lack of movement. It was the lack of her. Ior had not spoke to him in weeks. He had lost her. He had failed her. He had failed the Falari. He would be known as a laughingstock, his soul removed for combustion if he ever made it home. No. A high paladin does not give up. A high paladin steels himself against the forces of evil. He was here on Ior's holy quest. Not even the Empress knew his true reason for this foray. He was here for Ior alone. He would overcome the Wolf Lord, fight his way free, recruit a new foray and proceed to the final level of Zenith. There he would fulfill his destiny. He would break the chains on Zilzaluzan's jail, he would stride into the High Evil's chamber, and with the light of Ior at his back, he would purge the world of Zilzaluzan's presence forever. They would liberate the entirety of Zenith's mana for the Falari, and only then would Ior embrace him, and he would live forever in the light of her bosom. Fleein continued his prayers. Ior would answer. When it was time, Ior would answer. Gmul. It took days to fully reclaim the entire battlefield. He didn't spend time counting the corpses or anything like that, but they were plentiful, far more than he could find in most places. Zenith was paying off, and by the time he finished reclaiming the whole battlefield, he had everything he needed. He had made record time on this cycle. He wouldn't need to Mitos again, instead he began forming the Cenocite. This cycle was over. Lom was coming. Salia slit. Irelia, are you there or not? Irelia's voice crackled through the radio, I'm here. How's are we doing? That was unanticipated. Mostly fine. Denia got a bunch more people in when the barrier broke. Our competition just went up. Has anyone figured us out yet? No. Good. Hey Salia, are you okay? It looked like you took a hell of a beating up there. How's your VMR? Salia was bandaging her wounds. Her thorax was crushed in a few spots, but she'd live. She looked over at the VMR next to her. It was barely functioning. I might need your help with parts. It's gonna need some work, Salia said. I doubt I can make that happen. I'd like to help, but it's risky. Our deal is still on, but if you can't make it, I have no choice but to do this without you. Fair enough. Just promise me something. If I don't make it, use it on the Saldas first. Deal. Deal. Boyd. Boyd was still shitting out remnant jet crystals. The diarrhea was debilitating and the bits of black rock were like shitting out tiny pieces of crushed diamonds. His asshole was a disaster. Xena thundered into his head, you probably should have taken the frog's offer. Mind turning that down a bit? Also, I got other stuff to do first. He'll be around if I had to guess. The plan worked at least. You have 196 ranks to train. Yeah, I guess that oughta be fun. Nice call on the ring. You also have a gonzo amount of achievements. You might be the first to acquire many of those. Yeah, I guess that's something. It's more than something. Some of them will likely come with some serious rewards. I am not talking about titles either, I'm talking gold, experience, items, etc. Boyd wiped his ass again. It was burning like mad. He hoped this would stop soon. His head remained empty for a bit. He didn't have much to say at this point, his mind was on his innards being shredded. He was trying to figure out if he could mana-tap the pain away. Do you have a plan? Xena asked. Well, just to recap, I am sitting here shitting my brains out in the abandoned wreckage of some sort of space cruiser while I talk to the lady computer voice in my head, and I ain't even got no TP, so I still haven't figured out how I'm gonna wipe. I am stuck on this planet or whatever this is, and the people I came with have all basically given up on one another, With the exception of the evil dog creature who has kidnapped the guy who pulled my eye out, who is probably the biggest asshole I ever met. A frog sorcerer who seems to use water to do anything he wants has asked me to help him rescue the asshole who pulled my eye out, but on the other hand, the dog creature seems to be the only one who might be able to help me get home, so maybe I should be on his team. Both of them want to kill me, and I'm not entirely sure that frog doesn't too. The mechanical bird woman is missing, the mushroom thing is currently in some sort of cocoon state and won't move. The planet's been invaded by God knows how many extra creatures, all of whom are probably interested in killing me as well. So I guess I haven't quite figured out my next move yet. Maybe get something to eat, I guess. I'm hungry. My offer hasn't changed. I can get you home. Really? How's that gonna happen? Xena sighed, I need you to kill a god. The mark on Boyd's chest started to burn. Oh yeah? 'Cause believe it or not, I might actually have a plan for that.